Welcome. Find a comfortable position. Let your breathing slow and deepen, and allow yourself to settle into stillness. Tonight, we journey back through the centuries to colonial America, a world separated from ours, not merely by time, but by the fundamental conditions of existence itself. In the modest wooden structures scattered across the American frontier, women faced an ordeal that arrived with clockwork regularity, an experience so fraught with danger that it claimed more lives than any disease, any accident, any hardship of that demanding age. Childbirth, a natural process, we might think today. But imagine yourself in an era before anesthesia, before antibiotics, before any true understanding of infection or anatomy. Imagine facing this trial, knowing that many who entered the lying-in chamber did not emerge alive. Our exploration this evening will carry us through 4 distinct windows into colonial American life. We will begin in that frontier cabin, in the flickering candlelight, where a woman's survival hangs in the balance. From there, we will witness how fear and superstition could consume an entire community, turning neighbor against neighbor in Salem's dark winter of 1692. We will examine the mysterious world of colonial healing, where desperation met tradition in strange and sometimes deadly combinations. And finally, we will step into the refined drawing rooms of Philadelphia, where a new American culture was taking shape amid imported luxuries and revolutionary ideas. Let the present fade. Let comfort embrace you. And let us begin our quiet journey into the past. The first pains arrive in the small hours of morning, when darkness still presses against the oiled paper windows of your frontier cabin. You have felt this before, perhaps several times before, and you know what lies ahead. The rhythm of your life, dictated by the seasons and the soil and the endless labor of survival, must now pause for this ancient ordeal. Your husband rises silently, pulling on his coat to fetch the midwife who lives 2 miles distant through the forest. The children sleep on, unaware that today might reshape their lives in ways they cannot yet comprehend. The cabin measures perhaps 16 feet by 20, its walls of rough-hewn logs chinked with clay and moss. A single fireplace provides warmth, though on this March morning, the fire has burned low through the night. The floor, packed earth covered with scattered pine boards, feels cold beneath your feet as you begin to move, pacing as women have always paced through labor, trying to ease the mounting pressure. Your hands rest on the table your husband built when you first married, its surface worn smooth by years of bread making, vegetable chopping, the endless preparation of meals. Within an hour, the midwife arrives. Goodwife Miller has attended births for 30 years, learning the craft from her mother, who learned from hers. She carries a small basket containing the tools of her trade, clean linen cloths, a vial of ergot for, should bleeding become severe, scissors for cutting the cord, thread for tying it, and a flask of strong spirits. Her knowledge comes not from books or formal training, but from experience, observation, and the accumulated wisdom passed from one generation of women to the next. She has seen births that proceeded smoothly, the child arriving after a few hours of manageable pain. She has also seen births that lasted 3 days, births where the child presented wrongly, births where the mother bled until life slipped away, births where infection set in days later and brought death with terrible certainty. The midwife examines you with gentle, practiced hands. Your body is already changing, preparing for the work ahead. She estimates you have hours yet before the child will come, and she begins her preparations with the calm efficiency born of long experience. The bed must be prepared with old linens that can be discarded if they become too soiled. Water must be kept boiling on the fire. The room must be made as warm as possible, for the child will emerge into cold air and must be kept from chill. Neighbors begin to arrive, the women who form the lying-in chamber's essential company. Mrs. Hutchinson from the next farm, her daughter Sarah, old Mrs. Paris, whose own childbearing days ended a decade ago, but who still attends births to offer comfort and prayer. These women will remain with you through whatever comes. They will take turns supporting your weight as you labor standing, will hold cool cloths to your forehead, will murmur encouragement when pain makes you cry out. This is how birth happens in colonial America. In the company of women, in rooms closed to men, in spaces transformed temporarily into female sanctuaries, where the most fundamental and dangerous of all human experiences unfolds. The pains intensify as morning light filters through the windows. There is no relief available to you. No medication can dull this experience. No intervention can hasten it safely. You must simply endure, breath by breath, contraction by contraction, while your body performs its ancient function. The midwife checks your progress periodically, her experienced touch assessing what cannot be seen, estimating how many hours remain. 4, perhaps 5. Each examination brings hope that the ordeal will soon conclude and fear that some complication has arisen. Time assumes a strange quality during labor. Minutes stretch into eternities during contractions. The brief respites between them pass in heartbeats. You lose track of the hour, aware only of the cycle of pain and rest, the relentless rhythm that pulls you deeper into the experience until nothing exists except your body's overwhelming demand. The women around you speak quietly, their voices forming a kind of soothing background. They tell stories of other births, successful ones, quick ones, trying to bolster your spirits. They do not speak of the births that ended badly. Everyone in the room knows those stories without needing to voice them. By afternoon, the labor has intensified beyond anything you have yet experienced. The contractions come with little pause between them now, each one a wave of pressure so immense it seems impossible your body can contain it. The midwife has you squat on a low birthing stool, an old piece of furniture shaped like a horseshoe, allowing gravity to assist the process. Women support you on either side, holding you upright when your strength falters. Sweat soaks through your shift despite the March chill. Your hair, unpinned and loose, clings to your neck and face. The urge to push arrives with undeniable force. Your body takes over now, operating on instincts older than civilization, older than language itself. The midwife positions herself before you, hands ready to receive the child, speaking calmly, telling you when to push and when to breathe. The women at your sides grip your arms, lending their strength to yours. You push with everything you possess, feeling the child move downward, feeling your body stretch in ways that seem impossible, ways that bring pain beyond description. This is the moment of greatest danger. If the child is positioned incorrectly, if it is too large, if the cord is wrapped around its neck, if a dozen other complications arise, there is almost nothing the midwife can do. She has no instruments for surgical intervention. She cannot see inside your body to diagnose problems. She can only use her hands, her experience, her judgment built over decades of attending births, both successful and tragic. If something goes truly wrong, you will likely die. The child will likely die. This knowledge hangs unspoken in the room, present in the tension on every face, in the intensity of the prayers being murmured by old Mrs. Paris. But your body continues its work. Minutes pass that feel like hours. The midwife's hands guide the child's head as it emerges, supporting it, ensuring the cord is not compressed. One more push, she tells you. One more. You gather the last reserves of strength and push with desperate force, and suddenly the pressure releases. The child slides into the midwife's waiting hands, and the room fills with the sound everyone has been waiting to hear. A baby's cry. A daughter. The midwife works quickly, clearing the child's mouth and nose, checking that she breathes properly, examining her for obvious defects. She is small, but appears healthy. The cord still connects her to you, pulsing with blood, and the midwife waits for it to stop before cutting and tying it with practiced efficiency. The baby is wrapped in warm linen and handed to Mrs. Hutchinson, who will clean her more thoroughly while the midwife's attention returns to you. Your ordeal is not finished. The afterbirth must still be delivered, and this carries its own dangers. If it does not come completely, if pieces remain inside, infection will follow with near certainty. The midwife massages your belly, helping the contractions that will expel the placenta. When it comes, she examines it carefully, ensuring it is intact. Satisfied, she turns her attention to the bleeding. All women bleed after birth. This is normal and expected. But sometimes the bleeding does not stop, and then women die with terrifying speed, their life flowing out despite every effort to staunch it. The midwife watches you carefully, monitoring the blood loss, ready to administer the ergot if necessary to help your womb contract and slow the hemorrhage. Minutes pass with agonizing slowness while she observes. While everyone in the room holds breath, they do not realize they are holding. But your bleeding remains within normal bounds. The danger is passing. You have survived. The women help you to the bed, now made fresh with clean linens, and you lie back with exhaustion, so profound it feels like falling into a deep well. Your daughter is brought to you, cleaned and swaddled. She is perfect, her tiny face scrunched against the light, her miniature hands curling and uncurling. Relief washes through the room like a physical presence. The women smile, congratulate you, begin to gather their things. But they will return tomorrow, and for several days after, to check on your recovery, to help with household tasks you cannot yet manage, to ensure that no fever develops in the days following birth. This vigilance is necessary, because the immediate danger has passed, but another remains. Childbed fever, called puerperal infection, claims many women in the days and weeks after delivery. No one understands what causes it. This sudden onset of chills and fever and delirium that can kill within days. The midwife has washed her hands before attending you, as she always does, but she does not know about bacteria, about the invisible organisms that can enter the birth canal through unwashed hands or contaminated instruments. She cannot know that the very act of examination, meant to help, sometimes introduces the infection that will prove fatal. The colonial woman faces this threat with every birth. She has no antibiotics to combat infection once it starts. If fever sets in, her only hope is her own constitution, and even strong women often lose that battle. You know women who died this way. Your own sister, 3 years ago, left behind 4 children after what seemed like an easy birth. The fever took her 5 days later, and there was nothing anyone could do except watch and pray and wait for the inevitable end. But today, you are recovering well. The pain of labor is already fading into memory, replaced by the exhaustion of the ordeal and the strange, fierce protectiveness you feel toward the infant sleeping in your arms. You have done this before, and you know the coming weeks will be difficult. Your body needs time to heal, but there is no true rest available. The cabin still requires tending, meals still need preparation, the other children still need care. Within days, you will be up and working again, though your strength will take weeks to fully return. The postpartum period in colonial America offers little accommodation for recovery. Women are expected to resume their duties as soon as possible, and most do, working through pain and fatigue because the household cannot function without them. This early return to labor carries its own risks. Heavy lifting can cause hemorrhage to resume. Exhaustion weakens the body's ability to fight infection. But survival on the frontier depends on constant work from every member of the family, and new mothers are no exception. As you lie in bed with your newborn, you are also aware of another truth. This will happen again. Colonial women bear children at intervals of approximately 2 years throughout their fertile lives. If you live into your 40s, you might give birth 10 or 12 times. Some of these children will not survive infancy. Disease, accident, the simple fragility of young life will claim perhaps half of them before they reach adulthood. And each birth carries the same mortal risks you have just faced. Each pregnancy might be the one that kills you. This knowledge shapes the psychology of colonial motherhood in ways difficult for modern minds to grasp. Pregnancy is not merely the natural consequence of marriage and intimacy. It is a recurring threat to survival. Women approach each birth with the understanding that it might be their last experience on Earth. They write letters to their older children, leaving instructions and farewells in case they do not survive. They put their affairs in order, as one might before a battle. And they face labor, knowing that their fate rests largely in the hands of Providence, beyond any human intervention. The statistics are sobering. In colonial America, approximately 1 in 8 women dies from complications of pregnancy or childbirth. This makes it the leading cause of death for women of childbearing age, more dangerous than disease, accident, or any other peril they face. Men might die in war and farming accidents from disease. But women face a unique threat built into the very biology of reproduction, and they face it repeatedly throughout their lives. The women who attend births understand this viscerally. The midwife has seen too many deaths to count them all. The neighbors who sit with you through labor have each faced the same ordeal, each survived by chance or constitution or grace. They know how quickly a birth can turn from routine to disaster, how a woman can seem fine one moment and be hemorrhaging the next, how infection can appear days later with no warning. This shared knowledge creates a bond among colonial women, an understanding of mutual vulnerability that men, for all their own hardships, cannot fully share. The lying-in period, the weeks following birth when women are expected to remain primarily in bed and avoid heavy work, is meant to protect recovery. But economic necessity often overrides this ideal. Wealthy women in cities might afford several weeks of rest, with servants to handle household duties. But frontier women like yourself have no such luxury. The farm demands attention, the animals need feeding, the garden requires tending. Your husband helps where he can, and the neighbor women continue to assist. But within days, you will be up and moving, working through the pain and weakness, because there is simply no alternative. The child at your breast represents both hope and burden. Another mouth to feed, another body to clothe, another soul to guide toward adulthood in a world of constant peril. But also, continuity, legacy, the fulfillment of your role as wife and mother in colonial society. Children are economic assets in the agricultural economy of early America, future workers who will contribute to the household's survival. They are also emotional anchors, sources of love and purpose that make the hardships bearable. As evening approaches and the other women depart to their own homes, you are left with your husband and children in the quiet cabin. The baby sleeps, her breathing soft and even. Your husband sits nearby, his relief palpable, though largely unspoken. Men in colonial America are excluded from the birth chamber, waiting anxiously beyond closed doors, facing their own fear of loss. He has lived through the day knowing he might become a widower, his children motherless. That he has not speaks to fortune as much as anything else. The night settles around the cabin. The fire crackles low. Your body aches with a profound weariness, but you are alive. Your daughter is alive. Tomorrow the cycle of work will resume, the endless round of tasks that constitute survival in this place and time. But tonight, in the darkness, you can rest, knowing you have survived an ordeal that has claimed countless women before you and will claim countless more after. This is the reality of childbirth in colonial America, a natural process transformed into a life-threatening crisis by the absence of medical knowledge and intervention. Every birth a gamble, every pregnancy a potential death sentence, every woman who survives adding to her accumulated luck, while knowing that luck eventually runs out for everyone. The courage required to face this repeatedly throughout one's adult life is difficult to comprehend from our modern vantage point, but childbirth has been rendered vastly safer through medical advances our ancestors could not have imagined. Yet they endured. They bore children knowing the risks, loved those children knowing they might not see them grow, and faced each new pregnancy with whatever combination of faith, resignation, and hope they could muster. The rhythm of their lives included this dark thread, this understanding that the act of bringing new life into the world might cost them their own. And still they continued, generation after generation, building families and communities in a harsh new land, paying a price in lives that we can count in statistics, but never truly comprehend in human terms. In the quiet cabin, as sleep finally claims you, the reality of colonial childbirth fades into the personal experience of one more survival, one more child born, one more woman who lived to see another day. The larger pattern of mortality and risk will continue unabated for generations yet to come. But tonight, in this small wooden structure on the edge of wilderness, there is only relief and exhaustion and the soft breathing of new life. The winter of 1692 arrives cold and bitter in Salem Village, Massachusetts. The Puritan settlement, perched on the edge of the known world with wilderness, pressing close on all sides, huddles against the season's harshness. In the parsonage of Reverend Samuel Parris, something begins that will transform this small community into the site of colonial America's most infamous outbreak of supernatural panic. 9-year-old Elizabeth Parris, the minister's daughter, falls ill in January. Her symptoms defy easy explanation. Fits and convulsions, strange postures, incomprehensible utterances that seem to come from somewhere beyond her conscious control. Soon her 11-year-old cousin, Abigail Williams, who lives in the same household, begins to display similar afflictions. The village doctor, William Griggs, examines both girls and finds no physical cause for their condition. He offers a diagnosis that opens a door no one will be able to close. The girls are bewitched. The word spreads through Salem Village with the speed of winter wind through bare trees. Witchcraft, the invisible hand of Satan, reaching into their community, striking at innocent children. Within weeks, other girls begin to show signs of affliction. And Putnam Jr., 11 years old, Elizabeth Hubbard, also in her youth, experienced the same mysterious fits and torments. The phenomenon is spreading, and fear settles over the village like snow accumulating on frozen ground. Imagine yourself in this Puritan community, where belief in the supernatural is not superstition, but accepted reality. The devil is real, tangible, constantly seeking to corrupt and destroy. Witches are his servants, ordinary-looking people who have made compacts with evil itself, trading their souls for the power to harm their neighbors. Every misfortune might be witchcraft. A cow dying mysteriously, butter that will not churn, a child's sudden illness. The line between natural and supernatural causation is thin, permeable, crossed easily when fear and suspicion take root. The afflicted girls are questioned repeatedly. Who is tormenting you? What shapes do you see? Under this pressure, they begin to name names. On February 29th, arrest warrants are issued for 3 women: Titoba, Reverend Parris's slave from Barbados; Sarah Good, a homeless beggar woman; and Sarah Osborne, an elderly woman who has not attended church in over a year. These first accused share a common characteristic. They occupy the margins of Salem Village society, vulnerable figures unlikely to mount effective defense. The examinations begin on March 1st in the Salem Village Meeting House. The entire community crowds into the wooden building to witness the proceedings. The accused stand before magistrates John Hathorne and Jonathan Corwin, stern men convinced they are confronting genuine evil. The afflicted girls are present, and when the accused women appear, the girls writhe and shriek, claiming the specters of the accused are tormenting them, even as their physical bodies stand at a distance. This spectral evidence becomes the cornerstone of the prosecutions. The girls testify that they see the shapes, the invisible spirits of the accused, attacking them, pinching them, choking them. No one else can see these specters, yet the court accepts this testimony as valid proof of witchcraft. It is a dangerous precedent. creating a form of evidence that cannot be verified or disproven. That relies entirely on the word of the accusers. Tituba's confession changes everything. Under examination, perhaps hoping to save herself, perhaps coerced, she admits to being a witch. She tells the magistrates that there are other witches in Salem, that she has seen their names in the Devil's Book, that a conspiracy of evil exists within the community. Her words confirm the magistrates' worst fears and fuel the growing hysteria. If there are more witches, they must be found and exposed before they can do further harm. The accusations accelerate through March and into spring. Martha Corey, a church member in good standing, is accused. Rebecca Nurse, a 71-year-old woman, respected throughout the village, finds herself named as a witch. A profile of the accused begins to shift. No longer just marginal figures, the accusations now reach into the heart of the community, targeting people previously considered beyond suspicion. Fear deepens. If even the seemingly pious can be servants of Satan, then anyone might be a witch. Trust begins to erode, neighbor eyeing neighbor with new suspicion. Salem Village in this period is a community already fractured by internal tensions. Economic divisions separate the more prosperous residents connected to Salem town's merchant economy from the poorer, farming families who seek greater independence for the village. The Porter family and the Putnam family represent these opposing factions, their rivalry playing out in disputes over land, church governance, and village politics. Reverend Parris himself is a divisive figure, his tenure marked by controversy and his confrontational style alienating many parishioners. Into this atmosphere of existing conflict, the witchcraft accusations pour like oil on flames. Many of the accusations follow patterns of prior disputes. Property disagreements, old grudges, family rivalries find new expression in charges of witchcraft. Sarah Good, one of the first accused, had a contentious reputation and had been involved in disputes with neighbors. The accusations become a mechanism for settling scores, for expressing animosities that might otherwise have no outlet. But to reduce the Salem witch trials entirely to cynical manipulation would be to misunderstand the genuine belief that drives much of the hysteria. These are Puritan colonists for whom the supernatural is real and immediate. They have fled England to practice their religion with purity, establishing communities based on strict adherence to biblical law. They believe they are living in the end times, that Satan's final assault on God's people is underway. The frontier war with Native Americans, which has brought violence close to Salem, is interpreted as part of this cosmic struggle. Indian attacks are seen as the work of the devil, and the discovery of witches within their own community seems to confirm that they are besieged on all fronts. In May, Governor William Phipps establishes a special court of Oyer and Terminer to hear the witchcraft cases. 7 judges are appointed, with Lieutenant Governor William Stoughton serving as Chief Justice. The court convenes on June 2nd, and Bridget Bishop is the first to be tried. She is found guilty and sentenced to death. On June 10, 1692, Bridget Bishop is hanged at Proctor's Ledge in Salem. Her body swings from the gallows, the first official execution of the witch trials. More will follow with grim regularity through the summer months. The trials continue at an accelerating pace. On June 29th and 30th, 5 more women are tried and convicted. Rebecca Nurse, Sarah Good, Susanna Martin, Elizabeth Howe, and Sarah Wilds. All are condemned to death. By summer's end, the gallows will claim 19 lives total, 14 women and 5 men, all protesting their innocence to the end. One man, Giles Corey, refuses to enter a plea, and he is subjected to pressing heavy stones placed on his chest to compel him to cooperate with the court. He endures this torture for 2 days before dying. His last words reportedly, "more weight," a defiant refusal to participate in proceedings he considers unjust. More than 200 people are eventually accused of witchcraft during the crisis. The jails fill with the accused awaiting trial. Families are torn apart as children testify against parents spouses against each other. The accused have their property seized to pay for their imprisonment. Some die in jail from the harsh conditions before ever facing trial. The spectrum of the accused grows ever wider. John Alden Jr., son of the famous Plymouth colonist, finds himself accused. Even Lady Phipps, the governor's wife, is named, though this accusation is quickly suppressed. The hysteria seems to recognize no boundaries, and this very breath eventually becomes part of its undoing. By autumn, doubts begin to emerge. Some of the most respected ministers in Massachusetts express concerns about the reliance on spectral evidence. Increase Mather, one of the colony's leading theologians, writes that it were better that 10 suspected witches should escape than that one innocent person should be condemned. Continued expansion of accusations to include ever more respectable citizens raises questions about whether genuine witchcraft is being uncovered or whether something has gone terribly wrong. In October, Governor Phipps prohibits further arrests and releases many of the accused. The court of Oyer and Terminer is dissolved. In November, a new superior court is established to try the remaining cases. When this court convenes in January 1693, spectral evidence is no longer admissible. Without the testimony of the afflicted girls about invisible specters, the prosecutions collapse. Of 52 people tried in this new court, only 3 are convicted, and Governor Phipps pardons them along with the other 5 awaiting execution from the previous court. The trials end as abruptly as they began. By May 1693, all remaining accused are released from jail. The hysteria that gripped Salem for over a year dissipates, leaving behind a community traumatized and divided, and 19 bodies in unmarked graves. The aftermath brings guilt and recrimination. In 1697, the colony observes a day of fasting and prayer to atone for the injustice. Samuel Sewall, one of the judges, publicly confesses error and asks forgiveness. And Putnam Jr., one of the primary accusers, offers a public apology years later, claiming she was deluded by Satan. But apologies cannot restore the lives taken or fully heal the wounds inflicted. The social impact of the trials extends far beyond the immediate victims. Trust within the community has been shattered. People who testified against neighbors must now live alongside those they sought to condemn. Families of the executed carry the stigma of having a witch among their ancestry. Property disputes arising from the seizure of accused witches' estates create legal tangles that take years to resolve. The trials also leave a legacy of skepticism towards spectral evidence and a growing recognition of the dangers inherent in allowing uncorroborated testimony to condemn the accused. The Salem witch trials become a cautionary tale, cited in subsequent legal proceedings as an example of justice gone awry, of how fear and superstition can corrupt the judicial process. Yet in the immediate aftermath, life in Salem village must continue. Fields must be planted and harvested. Children must be raised. The rhythms of colonial existence resume, but the memory of that terrible year lingers like a shadow. The meeting house where the examinations took place remains standing, and passing by it must recall for many the sight of their neighbors shrieking in affliction, the stern questioning of the magistrates, the slow unraveling of their community's bonds. The story of Salem reminds us how fragile social order can be, how quickly fear can transform into violence, how belief systems that seem strange to modern minds shape the actions of people who were no less intelligent or capable than ourselves. They lived in a different world, one where invisible forces were real threats, where the devil walked among them seeking whom he might devour, where the line between victim and victimizer could shift with terrifying speed. In the quiet of a New England evening, years after the last execution, Salem village settles into an uneasy peace. The dead are buried and mourned. The survivors carry their memories and their guilt, and the story passes into history, a dark chapter that will be remembered long after the names of individual victims and accusers have faded from common knowledge. A reminder of what happens when fear overcomes reason, when community turns against itself, when the search for evil creates the very destruction it claims to prevent. The illness arrives without warning on a cold November morning. Your son, 8 years old and healthy the day before, wakes with fever burning in his small body. His skin is hot to the touch, his breathing shallow and rapid. You have no understanding of what has invaded him, no way to see the invisible forces at work. In colonial America, sickness is a mystery wrapped in fear, and the remedies available to you represent a strange convergence of traditions. European medical theory brought across the Atlantic, Native American plant knowledge learned from indigenous neighbors, African healing practices carried by enslaved peoples, and simple folk wisdom passed from generation to generation. Your first recourse is to the herbs drying in bundles from the cabin's rafters. Chamomile for fever, harvested in summer and stored against winter's needs. You prepare a tea, steeping the dried flowers in boiling water, coaxing your son to drink despite his discomfort. This remedy comes from English tradition, brought by settlers who remembered what their mothers and grandmothers used for childhood ailments. The warm liquid soothes, though whether it truly combats the fever or merely provides comfort, you cannot say. Colonial medical practice in this era rests upon theories that seem strange to modern understanding, but represent the accumulated wisdom of centuries. The dominant framework is humoral theory, inherited from ancient Greek physician Galen and taught in every European medical school. According to this system, the human body contains 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, corresponding to the 4 elements of air, water, fire, and earth. Health exists when these humors remain in balance. Illness results when one humor becomes excessive or deficient. Your son's fever, in humoral understanding, suggests an excess of blood, the hot and wet humor. The treatment, therefore, should aim to reduce this excess, to restore balance through removal of the overabundant substance. If you lived in a city with access to trained physicians, bloodletting might be recommended. The doctor would open a vein, allowing blood to flow into a basin until the appropriate amount had been removed. Anywhere from a few ounces to several pints, depending on the patient's age, condition, and the physician's judgment. But you live on the frontier, far from any physician. The nearest doctor resides 2 days' journey away in the coastal town, and the expense of such a consultation exceeds your means. You must rely on your own knowledge, on the wisdom of neighbor women, on remedies that have been passed down and adapted over generations of colonial settlement. As the day progresses and your son's fever does not break, you consider other options. Sassafras tea, learned from Native American neighbors, has a reputation for treating fever. The sassafras tree grows abundantly in the forests surrounding your settlement, and indigenous peoples have used its bark and roots for countless generations to treat various ailments. Cherokee healers employ all parts of the sassafras plant for conditions ranging from diarrhea to measles. You have seen this remedy work before, though you cannot explain why or how. The knowledge that colonists possess of Native American medicinal plants represents one of the most significant exchanges between cultures in early America. Indigenous healers understand the properties of plants that Europeans have never encountered, remedies developed over centuries of observation and use. Willow bark, chewed or brewed into tea, soothes pain and reduces fever. The active ingredient, salicin, will eventually form the basis for aspirin, though this discovery lies 2 centuries in your future. For now, you know only that willow bark works, that Native Americans have shared this knowledge, and that desperate parents will try anything that might save a feverish child. Other indigenous remedies have become part of colonial medical practice through similar transmission. The root of the tulip tree serves as a substitute for Jesuit bark, the precious cinchona from South America that treats malaria. Snake root, recommended by native healers for venomous bites, finds its way into colonial medicine chests. The seed capsules of Virginia anemone, soaked in brandy and applied to aching teeth, provide relief that seems miraculous to those suffering from dental pain? The exchange is not always straightforward or benign. Some Native American remedies involve powerful substances that can heal or harm depending on dosage and application. Peyote, used by southwestern tribes for pain relief, proved so effective that Army surgeons adopt its use, but it also carries risks of profound intoxication. Jimson weed, employed as an anesthetic by Virginia tribes, can cause delirium and death if improperly prepared. The line between medicine and poison is thin, and crossing it can be fatal. You prepare the sassafras tea carefully, measuring by instinct and memory rather than precise measurement. Your son drinks it, grimacing at the unfamiliar taste. Then you wait, as parents have always waited through their children's illnesses, hoping that whatever force has taken hold will release its grip, that the fever will break and health return. Colonial medicine also includes practices that seem not merely ineffective, but actively harmful. The theory of signatures, derived from Paracelsian philosophy, holds that plants resembling parts of the human body will cure ailments of those parts. Yellow flowers like saffron and turmeric treat jaundice because their color matches the yellowing of jaundiced skin. Walnuts cure headaches because their convoluted surfaces resemble the brain. These connections seem obvious to colonial practitioners, evidence of divine providence arranging nature for human benefit. The fact that such remedies rarely work does not shake faith in the underlying theory. Failures are attributed to improper preparation, insufficient prayer, or the patient's spiritual state, rather than flaws in the medical reasoning. More dangerous still are the treatments involving toxic substances. Mercury, called quicksilver, appears in remedies for syphilis and other conditions. Physicians prescribe calomel, a mercury compound that causes violent purging and salivation. Patients lose teeth, suffer mercury poisoning, endure agonies that often exceed the original illness. Yet the treatment continues, recommended by learned doctors who have studied at European universities and who believe they are applying the best medical knowledge available. Purging and vomiting, induced through various herbal preparations, form another staple of colonial medicine. The goal is to expel corrupt humors from the body, to cleanse the system of whatever imbalance has caused illness. Jalap, a powerful purgative derived from a Mexican plant, produces violent diarrhea. Emetics made from various herbs cause repeated vomiting. Patients already weakened by disease are further depleted by these aggressive treatments, their bodies losing fluids and nutrients at a time when they most need strength. Yet some colonial remedies do possess genuine medical value. Foxglove, used by Native Americans and adopted by colonists, contains digitalis, which strengthens heart contractions and will eventually become a cornerstone of cardiac medicine. Cascara sagrada serves as an effective laxative. Dogbane treats edema caused by heart and kidney failure. These plants work not because of humoral theory or signatures, but because they contain active compounds that affect human physiology in predictable ways. Colonial healers cannot explain the mechanism, but they observe the results and pass the knowledge forward. The role of women in colonial medicine deserves particular attention. In an era when formal medical training is restricted to men and available only in distant European universities, women serve as primary healers for their families and communities. They cultivate herb gardens, preserve medicinal plants, prepare remedies, and attend to the sick. This knowledge passes from mother to daughter, an oral tradition of practical therapeutics that operates parallel to, and often more effectively than, official medicine. Midwives, as we have seen, possess specialized knowledge of childbirth and women's health. But their expertise often extends further, encompassing general medical care, particularly for women and children. They set broken bones, treat wounds, prescribe herbal remedies for various ailments. Their authority derives from experience rather than formal education, from successful outcomes that build community trust. This female-dominated healing tradition carries certain risks. Women healers who become too successful whose remedies work too well may attract suspicion of witchcraft. The line between healing and magic is uncomfortably thin in the colonial mind, and women who possess knowledge of herbs and remedies can easily be suspected of possessing darker knowledge as well. The Salem witch trials, as we have seen, targeted several women known for their healing practices. The suspicion that healing power might derive from demonic sources rather than godly wisdom creates a dangerous environment for female practitioners. Your son's fever continues through the night. You sit beside him, changing the cool cloths on his forehead, encouraging him to drink the various teas and preparations you have made. Chamomile, sassafras, now a tea of yarrow, another Native American remedy said to break fevers. You have tried everything you know, and still the fever burns. By the second day, desperation sets in. Perhaps you should attempt bloodletting yourself, following the humoral theory, even without a physician's guidance. You have seen it done. Know that a small cut in the arm can release blood. But you hesitate, afraid of cutting too deep, of causing harm rather than healing. The decision weighs heavily, to act and possibly worsen the situation, or to wait and watch while your child suffers. In the end, you choose to wait, to trust in providence and the remedies you have already administered. You pray constantly, understanding that illness and health ultimately rest in God's hands. Colonial medicine, for all its theories and remedies, acknowledges the limits of human intervention. Prayer and faith constitute essential components of treatment, perhaps the most important components. On the third morning, your son's fever breaks. He wakes cooler to the touch, asking for water with a clarity he has not shown in days. Relief floods through you so powerfully it feels like a physical force. Whether the sassafras helped, whether the chamomile made a difference, whether divine intervention answered your prayers, you cannot know with certainty. What matters is that he has survived, that whatever mysterious force invaded his body has retreated. This pattern repeats throughout colonial communities. Illness arrives mysteriously. Treatments are attempted based on incomplete understanding. Patients either recover or succumb, and the living continue with their lives. The theories behind the treatments may be flawed, the remedies sometimes helpful and sometimes harmful, but the underlying human impulse to heal, to care for the sick, to seek remedies for suffering, remains constant. The mysterious nature of illness in this era cannot be overstated. With no understanding of germs, viruses, or bacteria, colonists attribute disease to miasmas, bad air rising from swamps and rotting matter, or to divine punishment for sin, or to witchcraft, or to funeral imbalances. Epidemics sweep through communities with no clear source and no effective treatment. Smallpox, typhoid, dysentery, influenza claim lives indiscriminately. Children die from infections that modern antibiotics would cure in days. Women perish from childbed fever caused by infections introduced during delivery. Men succumb to wounds that turn septic, to fevers of unknown origin, to wasting diseases that consume them slowly. In this landscape of medical uncertainty, the remedies people employ represent their best efforts to impose order on chaos, to fight back against the invisible forces that threaten life. Some remedies help, either through genuine medicinal properties or through the comfort they provide. Some prove neutral, doing neither harm nor good, and some kill, their toxic properties adding to the toll of disease they were meant to combat. The integration of Native American, European, and African medical traditions in colonial America creates a unique therapeutic culture. Each tradition contributes knowledge, remedies, and perspectives. Native Americans provide plant medicines adapted to North American flora. Europeans bring humoral theory and the practices derived from it. Africans enslaved and brought to the colonies carry their own healing traditions, including knowledge of plants similar to those in their homelands and spiritual practices of healing that persist despite efforts to suppress them. This convergence of medical cultures occurs in a context of power imbalance and cultural conflict. Native American healers share knowledge, sometimes voluntarily and sometimes under duress. African healing practices operate in spaces hidden from slaveholder surveillance, preserving traditions that colonizers consider superstition or worse. European medical theory, despite its frequent ineffectiveness, claims authority because it arrives backed by institutional power and the prestige of university education. As evening settles over your cabin and your son rests more comfortably, you reflect on the mystery of healing. You followed the remedies you knew, applied the treatments passed down through generations, prayed for divine intervention. Something worked, though you cannot say precisely what. Tomorrow he will be stronger, and in a few days he will return to his usual activities, the illness of fading memory. But others in the community have not been so fortunate. The widow Thompson's daughter died last month from a fever that would not break. The blacksmith lost his son to a flux that no remedy could stop. Illness remains a constant threat, mysterious and often fatal, and the treatments available offer hope without guarantee, comfort without certainty. This is the reality of colonial medicine, a world where sickness strikes without warning, where explanations are sought in outdated theories, where remedies range from genuinely helpful to actively harmful, and where survival often depends more on chance and constitution than on any treatment administered. Yet people continue to heal, to care for the sick, to search for remedies and cures, driven by love and desperation, and the fundamental human refusal to surrender to suffering without resistance. In the quiet cabin, with your son sleeping peacefully and the fire burning low, you can rest knowing you did everything possible. The mysterious force that threatened him has retreated. Tomorrow brings new challenges, new threats, the endless cycle of frontier survival. But tonight, there is health, and that is enough. The morning sun streams through tall windows of hand-blown glass, casting geometric patterns across polished mahogany floors. You wake in a bedchamber of the Pemberton townhouse on 3rd Street in Philadelphia, the most sophisticated city in colonial America, and the world you inhabit differs as dramatically from the frontier cabin as if you lived on another continent entirely. Here, in the heart of a thriving commercial metropolis, prosperity has created a culture that reaches toward European refinement while developing its own distinct American character. The house itself announces wealth and status through every architectural detail. Built in the Georgian style that dominates fashionable Philadelphia construction, the 3-story brick structure displays the bilateral symmetry and classical proportions that mark cultivated taste. The facade presents a balanced composition, 5 bays wide, with a central door crowned by a pediment and flanked by identical windows on either side. The brickwork, laid in Flemish bond with headers and stretchers alternating in each course, creates a subtle checkerboard pattern prized for its elegance. Philadelphia's brickyards produce materials in abundance, and brick construction signifies permanence and prosperity in a way that wooden structures, however substantial, cannot match. Inside, the central hallway runs from front door to rear, dividing the house symmetrically and providing access to rooms on either side. This floor plan, derived from English manor houses and adapted to urban Philadelphia, creates spaces for specific functions: a formal parlor for receiving guests, a dining room for elaborate meals, a library lined with books shipped from London, a counting house where your father conducts the business that sustains this privileged existence. Your father, Samuel Pemberton, belongs to Philadelphia's merchant elite, that class of traders whose commercial acumen has transformed a wilderness outpost into a port city rivaling Boston and New York. His fortune derives from the triangular trade that connects 3 continents in profitable exchange. Pennsylvania wheat, flour, and lumber shipped to the West Indies feed the enslaved laborers on sugar plantations. Sugar, rum, and molasses from the Caribbean travel to England. English manufactured goods return to Philadelphia to fill the shops and homes of an increasingly prosperous population. The Pemberton family traces its lineage to early Quaker settlers, who who arrived with William Penn in the colony's founding decades. Though Samuel has since joined the Anglican congregation at Christ Church, drawn by social connections and the Church of England's prestige, the family's Quaker roots provide the foundation of their social standing. In Philadelphia's hierarchical society, old family matters more than new wealth, and the Pembertons occupy the upper tier of an aristocracy based on ancestry as much as affluence. Breakfast in the Pemberton household unfolds with rituals that would be unimaginable on the frontier. You descend the staircase, its turned balusters and carved newel post imported from England, to the dining room where the family gathers. The table is set with porcelain from China, routed through the East India Company and brought to Philadelphia on merchant ships in which your father holds shares. Silver serving pieces, hallmarked in London, gleam in the morning light. The meal itself demonstrates Philadelphia's abundance. Wheat bread instead of corn, butter churned from the milk of dairy farms surrounding the city, preserved fruits from the previous summer, coffee imported from the Caribbean, and prepared by Sarah, the household's enslaved woman who manages the kitchen. The presence of enslaved people in this Philadelphia home represents one of the darker threads in the city's commercial fabric. While slavery never reaches the scale in Pennsylvania that it does in southern colonies, prosperous Philadelphia families often keep one or two enslaved servants. Sarah lives in a small room off the kitchen, her labor enabling the comfortable lifestyle the Pembertons enjoy, her own dreams and aspirations invisible beneath the surface of daily routine. The contradiction between Quaker-influenced ideals of human equality and the reality of slaveholding creates tensions that Philadelphia society largely chooses to ignore, though a small abolitionist movement has begun to question the institution. After breakfast, your education continues. For sons in elite Philadelphia families, learning extends far beyond basic literacy. Your brother Thomas, 17 years old, attends the College of Philadelphia, founded by Benjamin Franklin and others, as the city's first institution of higher learning. He studies classical languages, mathematics, natural philosophy, and rhetoric, preparing for a career in commerce or possibly law. The college represents Philadelphia's intellectual ambitions, its determination to cultivate minds as well as fortunes. For you, a daughter of 15, education takes a different form. Formal schooling ended years ago with mastery of reading, writing, and arithmetic. Now your training focuses on the accomplishments expected of a young woman in refined society. This morning, Madame Laurent arrives for your French lesson. She is a Huguenot refugee whose family fled religious persecution in France, and her presence in your home illustrates Philadelphia's cultural sophistication. Conversational French marks a lady of quality, enabling her to read fashionable novels, correspond with cultivated friends, and display refinement in social situations. The lesson proceeds in the parlor, where furniture arranged with careful attention to balance and proportion creates a setting for genteel activities. Chippendale chairs, their carved splats and ball and claw feet exemplifying the latest English fashion, surround a tea table of polished walnut. A looking glass in a gilded frame hangs above the mantel, multiplying the room's light and creating an illusion of greater space. Every object has been chosen to communicate taste, wealth, and cultural awareness. After French comes needlework, that essential feminine accomplishment. You work on a sampler begun months ago, its tiny stitches forming an alphabet, numerals, and a biblical verse surrounded by decorative borders. The finished piece will demonstrate your skill and patience, qualities deemed essential in a prospective wife. Later, you will advance to more ambitious projects. Embroidered clothing, decorative pieces for the home, the delicate work that transforms fabric into art and announces the maker's refinement. Your mother supervises this education while managing the complex household operations that sustain genteel life. Though Sarah and another servant handle most physical labor, running a prosperous Philadelphia home requires constant oversight. Menus must be planned, provisions ordered from shops and markets, linens inventoried, social obligations tracked and fulfilled. Your mother moves through these responsibilities with practiced ease, maintaining the domestic order that allows your father to focus on commerce and the family to project an image of effortless prosperity. The afternoon brings visiting, a crucial ritual in Philadelphia's social life. Your mother orders the carriage prepared. Your father owns shares in 2 ships, but also maintains a private carriage for family. Use and you accompany her on a round of calls. This practice follows precise rules of etiquette imported from England and adapted to colonial circumstances. Visits last exactly 15 minutes, unless one is invited to stay longer. Calling cards are left when the lady of the house is not at home. The timing and frequency of visits communicate status, intimacy, and social intentions through a subtle language that everyone in your circle understands perfectly. You call first at the Shippen House, then the Willings, then the Morrises, each family representing Philadelphia's mercantile aristocracy. The conversations touch on safe topics: upcoming assemblies, new fashions arrived from London, marriages and births within the social circle. Politics enters cautiously, as tensions with Britain have begun to create divisions even within elite families. Some merchants, prospering under imperial trade regulations, remain loyal to the crown. Others, including younger men like your brother Thomas, speak increasingly of colonial rights and parliamentary overreach. These discussions carry an undercurrent of anxiety. The commercial prosperity everyone enjoys depends on stable trade relationships, yet principles of liberty and self-governance exert growing appeal. Tea time at home provides another opportunity for ritual and display. The tea service, silver pieces imported from England at considerable expense, sits on a mahogany table in the parlor. Your mother presides over the ceremony of preparation, measuring the precious tea leaves into the pot, pouring water heated to the correct temperature, serving in delicate porcelain cups. Tea itself represents luxury, an imported commodity that announces the consumer's wealth and taste. The ritual surrounding its consumption transforms a simple beverage into a performance of gentility. The tea drinking habit has created political complications in recent years. Following the Stamp Act crisis and subsequent import boycotts, some Philadelphia families have rejected British tea in favor of coffee or local herbal substitutes as a statement of colonial solidarity. But this household, like many in the merchant class, continues the practice, unwilling to sacrifice refinement to political protest. The tension between commercial interests and growing political consciousness creates an awkwardness that hovers beneath polite conversation. Evening brings the family together for dinner, the day's substantial meal served in mid-afternoon, according to fashionable timing. The dining table groans with abundance that would astound frontier families. Roasted meats, fresh vegetables from market gardens, wheat bread with butter, fruit preserves, wine from Madeira. The meal demonstrates Pennsylvania's agricultural bounty and Philadelphia's position as a commercial hub where goods from surrounding farms converge before shipping to distant markets. Conversation at dinner reflects the intellectual culture that Philadelphia cultivates. Your father discusses developments at the American Philosophical Society, founded by Franklin to promote useful knowledge. Members present papers on natural philosophy, conduct experiments with electricity, debate agricultural improvements, and correspond with learned societies in London and Edinburgh. Philadelphia aspires to intellectual prominence as well as commercial success, and the city's prosperity provides leisure and resources for scientific and scholarly pursuits. Your brother Thomas mentions attending a play at the new theater on South Street. The existence of professional theater in Philadelphia represents a significant cultural development, though not without controversy. Quakers condemn play acting as frivolous and morally corrupting, but the Anglican and Presbyterian families that now dominate Philadelphia society embrace theater as a mark of cultural sophistication. The plays performed are English productions, the same works presented in London, creating a sense of transatlantic cultural continuity. After dinner, the family retires to the parlor for the evening. Your father reads the Pennsylvania Gazette, studying news of imperial politics and commercial developments. Your mother works on needlepoint while listening to you practice harpsichord, another accomplishment expected of refined young ladies. The instrument, imported at great expense and tuned regularly by a professional, occupies a place of honor in the parlor. Your playing demonstrates both your education and the family's cultural pretensions. As darkness falls, candles are lit throughout the house. This simple act represents significant expense. Quality candles made from beeswax or spermaceti cost far more than the tallow candles used by ordinary households. The quantity of candles burning in the Pemberton home on an ordinary evening would represent a week's wages for a laborer. But the soft, steady light they provide creates an atmosphere of warmth and prosperity, illuminating the refined spaces where genteel life unfolds. Before bed, you write in your commonplace book, that journal where young ladies of your class record improving thoughts, copy poetry and biblical verses, and practice the elegant penmanship that marks an educated person. Your hand moves across the page forming graceful letters, the ink imported from England flowing smoothly from a quill pen. This practice of self-cultivation through writing represents the interior dimension of refinement, the development of mind and character that should accompany outward accomplishments. The contrast between your life and that of frontier settlers could hardly be more stark. While mothers on the frontier face childbirth as a mortal threat in crude cabins, you will likely give birth attended by Philadelphia's trained physicians in a comfortable bedchamber. While frontier families struggle with mysterious illnesses and folk remedies, you have access to medical care informed by the latest European theories and medications. While frontier women labor endlessly at household production, you learn French and needlework and music. Yet your life, for all its privilege, carries its own constraints and demands. As a woman in Philadelphia society, your future will be determined largely by marriage, and marriages among elite families are matters of alliance as much as affection. Your education prepares you to be an ornament to a prosperous household, to manage servants and social obligations, to raise children in refinement. The accomplishments you acquire, French, needlework, music, serve primarily to make you an attractive marriage prospect, increasing your family's social capital through a suitable match. Your brother faces different expectations, but equally prescribed paths. Thomas will likely join your father's commercial enterprise, learning the intricacies of international trade, building networks of business correspondence, eventually assuming control of operations. Or he might study law, entering another profession suitable for a gentleman. His education provides tools for active participation in commerce and civic life. Yours prepares you for domestic management and social performance. The years ahead will bring dramatic changes to Philadelphia and the colonies. The tensions with Britain that now simmer beneath polite conversation will soon boil over into open conflict. Men like your father will face wrenching choices between loyalty to the crown and commitment to colonial rights. Young men like Thomas will debate independence in taverns and coffeehouses, eventually taking up arms in revolution. Philadelphia will become the birthplace of a new nation, host to continental congresses and constitutional conventions. But on this quiet evening in the 1760s, such developments remain hidden behind the horizon. The Pemberton household continues its comfortable routines, sustained by commercial wealth and organized around rituals of refinement. The polished floors gleam in candlelight. The imported porcelain sits securely in its cabinet. The harpsichord waits for tomorrow's practice. Everything speaks of permanence, prosperity, and the successful transplantation of European civilization to American soil. The Georgian townhouse stands as a monument to Philadelphia's achievement, a city that in less than a century has grown from wilderness to cosmopolitan center, where commerce generates wealth, wealth enables culture, and culture produces institutions of learning, healing, and enlightenment. The library company provides books to subscribers. Pennsylvania Hospital treats the sick with the latest medical knowledge. The American Philosophical Society advances useful learning. The College of Philadelphia educates young men in classical and practical subjects. This is the world the merchant elite has built. Ordered, prosperous, sophisticated, connected through commerce to the Atlantic world, yet developing its own distinct character. The Quaker values of simplicity and equality that shaped early Pennsylvania have given way to hierarchies of wealth and Anglican orthodoxy. Yet something of that original vision persists in Philadelphia's relative tolerance and civic-mindedness. As you prepare for bed in your comfortable chamber, removed from the day's activities to the private realm of sleep, you carry with you no real understanding of how fortunate you are. The frontier hardships, the struggles of ordinary people, the suffering of the enslaved, these exist at a distance, acknowledged perhaps, but not deeply felt. Your world is one of refinement and privilege, of accomplishments and social rituals, of comfort sustained by commercial wealth built on the labor of others. The candlelight flickers and fades as you drift toward sleep. Outside, Philadelphia settles into night. The waterfront quiet until morning brings renewed commercial activity. The cobblestone streets empty, except for watchmen making their rounds. The Delaware River flowing past on its journey to the sea. This city on the edge of wilderness has become a center of colonial life, and families like the Pembertons occupy its pinnacle, enjoying luxuries that would astonish earlier settlers and remain unimaginable to most of their contemporaries. Tomorrow will bring the same comfortable routine. Breakfast with imported luxuries, lessons in refinement, social calls governed by precise etiquette, evening entertainments that display culture and learning. The rhythm of elite life in colonial Philadelphia continues, generation following generation in prosperity, until the coming revolution disrupts everything and forces even the most privileged families to choose sides in a conflict that will transform colonies into a nation. But tonight, there is only comfort, security, and the quiet satisfaction of a life lived according to the highest standards of colonial refinement. The frontier's dangers seem distant, history's upheavals still to come. In the Georgian townhouse on 3rd Street, all is order, prosperity, and peace. You stand in the churchyard on a gray morning, the autumn air carrying the scent of damp earth and wood smoke from distant hearths. The faces around you are familiar, your neighbors, your family, people you have known your entire life, but they look at you differently now. There is pity in their eyes, and something else. Fear, perhaps, or relief that it is you standing here, and not them. The physician confirmed it 3 days ago, after examining your skin, your blood, testing your urine, and feeling your pulse. There were other lepers there too, men and women, who recognized in your lesions and numbness the mirror of their own affliction. The priest was called to witness. The verdict was delivered with the weight of both medical and divine authority. You have leprosy. You are unclean. Those 3 days were given to you to prepare, to settle your affairs, to say farewells that could never truly be adequate. You have tried not to think about what comes next, but now the moment has arrived. A priest stands before an open grave, not deep, but symbolic, and you understand with a clarity that steals your breath what you are about to become. The ceremony begins. The priest's voice is solemn as he leads you toward the grave, the gathered community following behind in processional silence. You are asked to step down into that shallow trench, to stand where the dead are laid. The smell of the earth surrounds you, mineral and ancient. 3 shovelfuls of dirt are thrown onto your head. You feel the weight of it, the grains catching in your hair, trickling down your neck. The funeral service proceeds. You are standing upright, breathing, your heart hammering in your chest, but the words being spoken are those meant for the dead. The priest concludes, Sis marchers mondo, vivens iterum Deo, dead to the world, reborn to God. You are expected to respond, to request rebirth on the final day. Your voice comes out hollow, Unfamiliar to your own ears? This is the separatio leprosorum, the separation of lepers, a ritual practiced throughout Christian Europe since the Lombard Edict of Rothery in 643. When it is finished, you will be legally dead. Your property, your inheritance, your family all severed. The person you are no longer exists in the eyes of the law. The priest asks those present not to harm you, to remember human kindness and divine judgment, to provide for your needs. Alms are placed into a box. Prayers are murmured. Then comes the costume you must wear for the rest of your days. A rough sackcloth robe, emblazoned with an identifying mark, a bell to ring as you approach anyone, a cross to mark your spiritual status, and that alms box you will now carry everywhere. The most important item, though, is the bell. You must ring it constantly when near others, must call out warnings of your approach. Unclean, you will say, again and again, for years to come. Unclean, you are led away from the churchyard, away from your former home, toward the edge of the community where you will plant your cross and alms box. But you are fortunate, in a sense. There is a leprosarium 5 miles distant, the Hospital of St. Mary Magdalene. It is a leper house associated with Winchester, one of the oldest such establishments in England, founded sometime in the 12th century when leprosy became endemic across Europe. The walk takes most of the day. Your bell rings with each step, a constant metallic whisper announcing your presence. Travelers on the road give you wide berth. Some cross themselves. Others leave small coins or pieces of bread at a distance, unwilling to approach, but moved by charity or fear of God's judgment, should they ignore you. The leprosarium appears in the late afternoon, built on the outskirts of settlement near a crossroads. Leper houses were always positioned this way, on the edges, near travel routes, close enough to society for alms and trade, but removed enough to maintain separation. The buildings are constructed of gray stone, weathered but sturdy. There is a chapel at the center, its spire modest but reassuring. As you approach, other figures emerge. Men and women wearing similar robes to yours, some with faces partially concealed by hoods. A few bear visible signs of the disease: skin lesions, swollen features, hands with fingers curled into claws. You realize with a strange mixture of horror and relief that you are no longer alone in your affliction. The master of the house greets you, a lay administrator who runs the daily operations of the leprosarium. He is not a physician, but he has years of experience caring for those with leprosy. He explains the rules: daily attendance at prayer services, participation in communal labor where able, celibacy, and obedience to the house's regulations. Those who break the rules face punishment, sometimes harsh. But there is also unexpected comfort. You will have a bed in the communal dormitory, sheltered from the elements. You will receive regular meals, better food than many peasants enjoy. And perhaps most importantly, you will be part of a community again, even if it is a community of the outcast. Life inside the leprosarium follows a strict temporal rhythm, measured by the canonical hours. You wake before dawn to the sound of bells, different bells than the one you carry. These are church bells calling the community to lauds, the morning prayer. The dormitory is cold, the stone walls holding the night's chill. Around you, other leprous brothers and sisters rise from their narrow beds, reaching for robes, moving slowly. Some have difficulty with their hands. Others must feel their way in the darkness, their eyes damaged by the disease. The chapel is the heart of the leprosarium. Built around a modest altar, it is a space of surprising beauty. Even here, at the margins of society, there is attention to spiritual detail. The services are long, the Latin prayers washing over you in waves of incomprehensible sound. But there is something soothing in the repetition, in the certainty of ritual. You learn quickly that prayer is not merely spiritual obligation, but social currency. The laity believe that the prayers of lepers are particularly effective, that those who suffer in this life have special access to divine mercy. Wealthy benefactors make donations to the leprosarium with the explicit understanding that the leprous residents will pray for their souls. Your suffering, in a paradoxical way, has value. You are a professional prayer, your pain transformed into spiritual labor. After the morning prayers, there is breakfast. Simple porridge, perhaps some bread, weak ale. The food is plain but adequate. As the disease was believed to result from an excess of black bile alcohol, dry humor, the leprosarium's diet is carefully designed to restore balance. You are served foods considered moist and warm: eggs, poultry, pork, fresh milk when available, and especially fish. The leprosarium has secured fishing rights to a nearby stream, and several residents spend their mornings tending nets and lines. There are also dairy cows in a small pasture, their milk going to the leper's diet. Hens scratch in the yard, providing eggs. A few pigs root in a pen, destined eventually for the table. These animals represent not luxury, but medical necessity. Their flesh and products prescribed by physicians to counteract the humoral imbalance causing your condition. After breakfast, those who are able work in the gardens. The leprosarium maintains vegetable plots and herb gardens, both for food and for medicinal purposes. The work is gentle, adapted to damaged hands and diminished strength. You learn to tend cabbages, to harvest onions, to recognize the herbs used in treatment: feverfew, rue, betony. The garden connects you to the earth, to the cycle of growth and harvest that continues regardless of human suffering. There is something meditative about pulling weeds, about the feel of soil between fingers that still retain some sensation. It is a small mercy, this connection to growing things. Leprosy, what medieval physicians called lepra or elephantiasis, was believed to manifest in 4 types, corresponding to the 4 humors. The form attributed to excess black bile was considered the most severe, darkening the skin and causing leonine facial features. But the disease you experience doesn't always match the neat categories described in medical texts, like Gilbert the Englishman's Compendium Medicinae or Jordan of Therese, The Symptoms of Lepers. What you notice first is the numbness. It begins in your extremities, fingers, toes, and spreads slowly inward. The loss of sensation is insidious because pain is protective. You burn yourself reaching for a pot and don't realize until you smell flesh charring. You cut your hand on a tool and notice only when you see the blood. The skin lesions come next, or perhaps they were always there, but they become more pronounced. Patches of discolored skin, nodules that rise beneath the surface, thickening of facial features. Some residents of the leprosarium have leonine faces, their features coarsened and swollen. Others have lost portions of their noses or ears, the cartilage absorbed by the disease's slow consumption. The worst part, though, is the isolation within isolation. Even among other lepers, you are aware of your changing appearance, of the way people even here sometimes look away. Mirrors are rare, but you catch glimpses of your reflection in water basins. See your hands changing shape, fingers curling as tendons contract. Yet the disease progresses slowly, sometimes over decades. There are residents who have lived in the leprosarium for 20 years, 30, who have weathered the disease's changes and found a kind of equilibrium. They are the ones who teach you the small strategies of coping. How to bind hands that no longer grip properly. How to protect numb feet with extra wrappings. How to clean wounds you cannot feel. The leprosarium is situated near a natural spring, a fortunate placement that provides access to mineral-rich waters. Several times a week, you are encouraged to bathe in the heated water, scented with herbs. The heat encourages sweating, which medieval medicine believed expelled impurities from the body. The soaking also relieves the pain of open sores, bringing temporary comfort to damaged flesh. As you scrub your skin carefully, always carefully, aware of the numbness, you remove layers of dead tissue. The bathing sometimes brings sensation back to damaged limbs, a tingling that is almost painful, but also strangely welcome. a reminder that nerves still function, however imperfectly. The lay staff who run the leprosarium do their best to implement physicians' advice, though they have no formal medical training. They prepare herbal remedies, apply poultices, adjust diets based on humoral theory. The treatments are largely ineffective against the disease itself. Medieval medicine had no cure for leprosy, but they provide structure, hope, the sense that something is being done. There is also spiritual treatment. The disease is widely understood as both physical and moral, a manifestation of sin or a test of faith sent by God. The relentless schedule of prayer is meant to address this spiritual dimension, to purify the soul even as the body deteriorates. You find yourself uncertain what to believe. Is this disease punishment, test, random misfortune? The answer seems to shift depending on the day, on how much pain you're in, on whether the prayers bring comfort or merely fill time. The most difficult aspect of life in the leprosarium is not physical but psychological. You are treated as a walking corpse, legally dead but biologically alive. Your family may visit, some leprosaria allow this, but the visits are shadowed by the knowledge that you cannot return to your former life. Your children, if you had any, will inherit without you. Your spouse may remarry. The world continues without you in it. There are moments of profound despair. Nights when you lie in the dormitory, listening to others cough or cry out in pain, and you wonder if it would have been better to die truly, quickly, rather than endure this slow dissolution. The rules of the leprosarium enforce celibacy, cutting you off from physical intimacy and the possibility of new family bonds. Yet paradoxically, there is also relief. Here, you are not alone in your suffering. The stigma that follows you outside the leprosarium's walls is absent within them. Everyone here carries the same burden, wears the same marks, faces the same uncertain future. Friendships form, quiet and deep, between people who understand without explanation what it means to be declared dead while still breathing. The leprosarium, contrary to popular modern conception, is not entirely cut off from the outside world. Lepers needed to maintain contact with society, to receive alms, to trade items they produced, to offer the spiritual services, prayer, that justified their continued existence in the eyes of the charitable. There was even demand for places in leper houses, suggesting that many people preferred the relative security of institutional life to the dangers of begging on the roads. You are encouraged to develop skills, to contribute what you can. Some residents become skilled at specific crafts adapted to their limitations. Others focus on prayer, becoming known for the power of their intercessions. You find yourself falling into rhythms: morning prayers, garden work, meals, bathing, evening prayers, sleep. The repetition is both numbing and comforting, a way to structure time that might otherwise stretch unbearably. The seasons turn. Winter arrives, and the stone buildings that provided shelter in summer now feel like tombs of cold. The dormitory is difficult to heat adequately. You sleep in your clothes, piling on every layer you possess, sharing body warmth with those in adjacent beds. The cold is particularly dangerous for those with leprosy. Numb extremities are prone to frostbite without the warning pain that would cause others to seek warmth. You learn to check your fingers and toes obsessively, looking for the telltale white patches that signal frozen flesh. Food becomes more monotonous in winter. The gardens are dormant. Fresh fish are harder to obtain. The diet shifts toward preserved foods: salted meat, dried beans, root vegetables from storage. The meals are still adequate. The leprosarium receives regular donations from benefactors anxious about their souls that the variety disappears. Some residents do not survive the winter. The combination of disease, cold, and the general vulnerability of compromised bodies proves too much. There are funerals, real ones this time, in the small cemetery attached to the leprosarium. You stand with the other residents and watch as someone who shared your meals, your prayers, your strange liminal existence is finally, fully released from it. The deaths are marked with both grief and a curious envy. The deceased are now truly with God, their suffering ended, their spiritual journey complete. You murmur the prayers and wonder when your own release will come, whether it will be this winter or many winters hence. The church calendar brings its own rhythm to leprosarium life, and no festival is more significant than Easter. For a few days each year, the exile is partially lifted. You are permitted to enter the town proper, to attend services in the main church, to see family. The joy of this temporary freedom is intense but bittersweet. You must still wear your identifying costume, still ring your bell, still call out warnings. People make way for you, leave offerings, but maintain their distance. Children stare. Some adults cross themselves. You are permitted to be present, but remain fundamentally separate. You see your family, those who will see you. Some visit regularly at the leprosarium, bringing news and small gifts. Others have pulled away, whether from fear of the disease, discomfort with your changed appearance, or the simple difficulty of maintaining connection with someone who exists outside normal society. Your former home looks smaller than you remember. The streets are both familiar and strange, like a place from a dream. You realize that you have begun to think of the leprosarium as home, that the world beyond its walls has become foreign. When Easter ends, returning to the leprosarium brings unexpected relief. The effort of navigating the outside world, of managing the stairs and the careful distance people maintain, is exhausting. Back within the stone walls, among others who share your condition, you can let your guard down, can move without ringing your bell, can exist without constantly announcing your own uncleanness. What emerges over months and years is a paradoxical reality. The leprosarium, meant as a place of exile and exclusion, becomes a genuine community. Not everyone accepted into the house adjusts well. Some remain bitter, angry at their fate, unable to find peace in prayer or comfort in companionship. But many perhaps most find ways to adapt, to create meaning in constrained circumstances. There are friendships, deep and lasting. There are rivalries and conflicts too, because lepers are still human, still capable of pettiness and jealousy alongside compassion. There are romances technically forbidden, but occurring nonetheless, people finding connection in the midst of isolation. The leprosarium functions almost like a monastic community, with its emphasis on prayer, communal labor, and renunciation of the wider world. Some residents embrace this fully, accepting their leprous brothers and sisters into the religious order of the house, taking formal vows. They find in religion not just comfort but purpose, transforming their exile into a form of holy retreat. Medieval historian Anne-Marie Leander Tawati has argued that leper asylums are better understood as voluntary retreats where people worked toward salvation, rather than as sinister prisons. While the voluntary nature is debatable, few would choose leprosy. There is truth in recognizing that many leprosaria offer genuine community, relative stability, and spiritual meaning to people who might otherwise have faced destitution and complete isolation. You find yourself settling into this strange life. The passage of days blurs into weeks, months, years. Your disease progresses but slowly. You lose sensation in more areas, develop new lesions, experience occasional infections that the staff treat with poultices and prayer. But you also discover unexpected resilience, the human capacity to adapt to even the most difficult circumstances. The gardens continue to need tending. The prayers continue to be said. Benefactors continue to donate, believing in the efficacy of leprous intercession. The rhythm of life within the leprosarium walls carries you forward, day by day, season by season, through an existence that is neither fully living nor completely dead, but something peculiarly in between. And in quiet moments, when the chapel bells ring for vespers, when evening light slants through the dormitory windows, when you share a simple meal with others who understand without words what it means to be declared unclean, you find small moments of contentment. Not happiness, perhaps, but a kind of peace with the life that remains to you. A life measured in prayers and garden work, in the company of the excluded, in days that follow one after another, in predictable, almost comforting succession. The world beyond the leprosarium walls has forgotten you, declared you dead, and moved on. But here, in this stone community, at the edge of society, you continue. You continue until the day when the living death becomes death itself, and you are finally fully released. A year is 1187, and news reaches Europe like a thunderclap. Jerusalem has fallen. Saladin, the Sultan of Egypt and Syria, has defeated the Crusader armies at the Horns of Hattin and reclaimed the holy city for Islam. Nearly a century of Christian control has ended. The true cross, the most sacred relic of Christendom, has been captured. The response across Christian Europe is immediate and profound. Pope Gregory VIII calls for a new crusade. Kings take up the cross. In England, Richard I, not yet called Lionheart, prepares for the greatest military expedition of his life. In France, Philip II Augustus makes similar preparations. In the Holy Roman Empire, Frederick Barbarossa, the elderly but still formidable emperor, gathers his forces. The mobilization takes years. Crusades cannot be launched hastily. They require vast quantities of supplies, financing, ships, and men. Richard, still a prince when the call came, must wait until his father Henry II dies in 1189 before he can fully commit England's resources to the endeavor. Philip faces his own delays. Frederick departs first, marching overland through Anatolia, but drowns in a river in 1190, his army fragmenting in the aftermath of his death. By the time Richard and Philip arrive in the Holy Land in 1191, the Crusaders have already been besieging the coastal city of Acre for nearly 2 years. The siege began in August 1189, when Guy of Lusignan, the deposed king of Jerusalem, decided to strike back against Saladin. What followed was a grueling stalemate. The Crusaders surrounded Acre, but Saladin's army surrounded them in turn, creating a peculiar double siege where both sides received supplies by sea and neither could achieve decisive victory. Imagine the landscape around Acre in the spring of 1191. A coastal plain transformed into a vast military encampment. Tents stretch for miles, thousands upon thousands of them, housing soldiers from across Europe: French, English, German, Italian, Flemish. The smell is overwhelming. Unwashed bodies, latrines, cooking fires, the salt tang of the sea, the sweet sick odor of disease. For nearly 2 years, men have been dying here, not primarily from battle, but from illness and malnutrition. The conditions are ideal for epidemic disease. Crowded quarters, inadequate sanitation, limited fresh water, armies weakened by campaigning. Medieval chronicles record that approximately 30% of nobles and 16% of clergy died during the campaign, most from disease rather than combat. Richard arrives by ship in June 1191, and his presence immediately energizes the siege. But within days of his arrival, both he and Philip fall gravely ill with a mysterious affliction the chronicles call Arnaldia in Latin or Lenardy in French. The symptoms are alarming. High fever, hair falling out in clumps, teeth loosening, fingernails becoming detached, skin peeling away. For weeks, both kings hover near death. Richard, even in his weakened state, refuses to abandon the siege. Chronicles describe him being carried on a stretcher, covered in silk quilts to the walls of Acre, where he picks off defenders with his crossbow, maintaining pressure on the city even as his body fails him. Philip, less robust, suffers terribly but also perseveres. Modern historians have debated the nature of Arnaldia for centuries. Some suggest scurvy, but the symptoms don't quite match, and contemporary texts use different terms for scurvy. The fever argues against scurvy as well. More likely, it was a febrile illness causing hair and skin loss, perhaps related to malnutrition and the unsanitary conditions of the siege camp. The term appears to derive from the Greek word for a sheep disease, adapted to describe a human condition that medieval physicians struggled to classify. Eventually, both kings recover enough to resume command. The siege engine's great trebuchets and mangonels pound Acre's walls day after day. Inside the city, the defenders are starving, having held out for 2 years through determination, and hoped that Saladin would break through the Crusader lines. But with Richard's arrival bringing fresh troops and renewed vigor, that hope begins to fade. On July 12, 1191, Acre surrenders. The terms are negotiated. The garrison will be spared in exchange for a substantial ransom, the return of captured Christian prisoners, and the restoration of the True Cross taken at Hatton. The garrison, some 2,500 to 3,000 men, women, and children, become hostages pending Saladin's fulfillment of these terms. The deadline arrives, August 11th, 1191. Saladin sends a first installment, but not the full payment, not all the prisoners, not the True Cross. Negotiations continue. Days pass. Richard grows impatient. His army, victorious at Acre, is eager to march on Jerusalem, but he cannot leave while thousands of Muslim prisoners require guarding. On August 20th, 1191, Richard makes a decision that will echo through history. He orders the prisoners brought out from the city and executed in full view of Saladin's army. What follows is methodical slaughter. Somewhere between 2,500 and 3,000 people, men, women, and children, killed by sword and lance. The Muslim chronicler Baha al-Din, who witnessed the event from Saladin's camp, recorded, "Then they brought the Muslim prisoners whose martyrdom God had ordained, more than 3,000 men in chains. They fell on them as one man and slaughtered them in cold blood, with sword and lance." Saladin's forces attacked during the killings, attempting to stop the massacre or rescue the prisoners. But the Crusaders maintained formation and retired in good order when the work was done. The Christian chroniclers offer various justifications. Roger of Hoveden reports that 5,000 were killed. Geoffrey de Vinsauf writes that 2,700 Turkish hostages were led forth from the city and hanged, describing the soldiers as taking revenge for Christian deaths. Ambroise, another chronicler, writes simply, 2,700, all in chains, were led outside the wall, where they were slaughtered every one, and thus on them was vengeance done. Modern historians debate Richard's motives. Was this cold pragmatism and inability to guard thousands of prisoners while marching on Jerusalem, combined with Saladin's failure to meet the ransom terms? Was it calculated brutality designed to terrorize future opponents? Was it vengeance for the 2 years of suffering at Acre? Perhaps all of these. Medieval warfare recognized different rules than modern conventions, but even by contemporary standards, the massacre was controversial. Saladin responded by executing various Crusader prisoners in retaliation. The cycle of violence, already ancient, continued. With Acre secured and the prisoner question resolved in the most brutal manner possible, Richard's army begins its march south along the coast toward Jaffa. Control of Jaffa is essential before any attempt on Jerusalem can be made. The coastal route offers access to supplies by sea, but it also exposes the Crusader column to constant harassment by Saladin's forces. The march unfolds in the intense heat of late summer. The army moves in careful formation, infantry on the inland side, protecting the column from Muslim cavalry, baggage and supply trains in the center, the navy sailing parallel along the coast. It is a military procession of remarkable discipline, covering perhaps 8 to 10 miles per day, always maintaining cohesion. Saladin shadows the march, looking for opportunities. His mounted archers make probing attacks, testing the Crusader formation, trying to provoke a charge that would break their line. Richard forbids his knights to respond to these provocations, maintaining formation despite the losses to archery. The heat, the dust, the constant harassment, the slow pace, all of it wears on the men. On September 7th, 1191, at Arsuf, 30 miles north of Jaffa, Saladin commits to a major assault. His forces attack the Crusader column in strength, attempting to break their formation and destroy the army in the field. For hours, Richard's men endure the assault, maintaining discipline even as some units begin to waver. Finally, Richard orders a general counterattack. The Crusader heavy cavalry, held in reserve throughout the march, charges into Saladin's forces. The impact is devastating. The Muslim lines break. Saladin's army retreats, having failed to stop the march. It is a significant tactical victory for Richard, demonstrating both the effectiveness of disciplined formation and the shock power of coordinated heavy cavalry. The army continues to Jaffa and secures the city. Jerusalem now lies within reach, perhaps 40 miles inland. But the strategic situation is more complex than simple distance suggests. Twice Richard advances toward Jerusalem, and twice he turns back. The first approach comes in December 1191. The army moves inland through increasingly difficult terrain. Winter rains turn roads to mud. Supply lines stretch thin. The men are cold, wet, exhausted. But the more fundamental problem is strategic. Even if the Crusaders capture Jerusalem and the city's fortifications are formidable, can they hold it? The city lies far from the coast, from the supply lines that sustain Christian presence in the region. Saladin's forces, even after defeat at Arsuf, remain intact and capable. A garrison left in Jerusalem would be isolated, vulnerable to siege, dependent on supply caravans that could be interdicted. Richard's military advisors, particularly the Templars and Hospitallers, who know the region intimately, counsel withdrawal. The goal should be to consolidate control of the coast, to rebuild the Kingdom of Jerusalem as a viable state, not to make a symbolic gesture that cannot be sustained. Richard, for all his martial reputation, listens to this advice. In January 1192, the army turns back toward the coast. The decision is militarily sound, but psychologically devastating for many Crusaders. They have come thousands of miles, endured years of hardship, watched comrades die of disease and battle, all to reclaim Jerusalem. Now, with the city almost in sight, they retreat. Some chronicles report that Richard wept when he turned away, refusing to look at the city he would not enter. The army spends the spring of 1192 fortifying coastal positions, particularly the castle at Ashkelon. There are negotiations with Saladin, tentative discussions of peace terms. But in June, Richard makes a second advance toward Jerusalem. Again, strategic realities force withdrawal. The city cannot be held. The crusade, despite its victories, cannot achieve its primary objective. In July 1192, Richard begins preparing to withdraw from the Holy Land. The reasons are multiple: strategic stalemate in Palestine, concerns about his territories in France, where Philip has returned and begun making trouble, the impossibility of taking Jerusalem, and perhaps most significantly, Richard's deteriorating health. The illness that struck at Acre returns in a different form. Now it is described as febris emetridia, a fever that leaves Richard dangerously weak. Medieval campaigning, especially during long sieges and poor sanitary conditions, predisposed Crusaders to recurrent illness. Richard appears to have suffered recurring bouts of malaria or similar fever throughout much of his life. By the summer of 1192, his health is visibly impaired. But before Richard can depart, Saladin makes one final bid to change the strategic balance. On July 27th, he lays siege to Jaffa, recently fortified by the Crusaders as a critical coastal stronghold. The timing is opportune. Richard is preparing to leave, his attention divided, his health compromised. Jaffa falls quickly. Saladin's forces capture the town, though a small garrison holds out in the citadel. When news reaches Richard, who is further up the coast, he immediately sails south with a small force. Arriving at Jaffa by sea, Richard lands directly on the beach with only a handful of knights and crossbowmen. What follows is one of the more dramatic episodes of the crusade. Richard, despite his illness, leads a counterattack that retakes Jaffa. Days later, on August 5th, Saladin launches a surprise dawn assault on Richard's small force camped outside the city walls. Richard rallies his men, perhaps 2,000 soldiers, against Saladin's much larger army and forms them into defensive formation. The Battle of Jaffa becomes a demonstration of tactical skill over numerical superiority. Richard positions his crossbowmen and infantry in a tight formation that the Muslim cavalry cannot break. The fighting is fierce but disciplined. When Saladin's forces finally withdraw, Richard remains in possession of Jaffa. It is the final armed encounter between the two monarchs. Both sides are exhausted. Saladin has failed to dislodge the Crusaders from the coast, but has successfully defended Jerusalem. Richard has won tactical victories, but cannot achieve strategic objectives and needs to return to his European territories. Neither side can afford to continue indefinitely. Negotiations, which have proceeded intermittently throughout the campaign, now reach conclusion. On September 2nd, 1192, Richard and Saladin finalized the Treaty of Jaffa. The terms reflect the military stalemate. Jerusalem will remain under Muslim control. This is the central, unavoidable reality. The Crusades' primary objective has not been achieved. However, unarmed Christian pilgrims and merchants will be permitted to visit the city freely. The holy sites will be accessible, even if the political control remains Islamic. The Kingdom of Jerusalem is restored, but in dramatically reduced form. A narrow strip along the Syrian coast from Tyre to Jaffa. The Crusaders retain Acre, Jaffa, and several coastal fortresses. It is a shadow of the kingdom that existed before Hattin, but it is something. The Christian presence in the Holy Land, though diminished, will continue. The treaty guarantees a 3-year truce. Both sides agree to respect the terms, to allow safe passage of pilgrims and merchants, to maintain the territorial division. It is a pragmatic peace, negotiated between military equals who respect each other's capabilities even as they remain enemies. Medieval chroniclers would later romanticize the relationship between Richard and Saladin, portraying them as the embodiment of chivalric ideals. The reality was more complex. They were professional military commanders engaged in a religious war, capable of both tactical brilliance and calculated brutality. The massacre at Acre and the executions that followed demonstrate that medieval warfare, even when conducted by celebrated warriors, could be horrifyingly ruthless. Richard departs the Holy Land on October 9th, 1192. His health remains fragile, impaired by the repeated illnesses suffered during the campaign. The journey home should be straightforward sail to a friendly port in Europe, proceed overland to his territories. But Richard makes the fateful decision to travel through lands where he has enemies. During the siege of Acre, there had been disputes over precedence and honor. When the city fell, Duke Leopold V of Austria raised his banner alongside Richard's and Philip's, claiming equal status. Richard, asserting that only kings deserved such honor, had Leopold's banner torn down and thrown in a ditch. It was an insult that Leopold would not forget. In December 1192, while traveling in disguise through Austrian territory, Richard is recognized and captured near Vienna. Leopold, seizing the opportunity for revenge, arrests the Crusader king. The act is scandalous, taking a returning Crusader captive violates both secular custom and church law, but Leopold proceeds nonetheless. Pope Celestine III excommunicates Leopold for imprisoning a Crusader, but the Duke has already made his calculation. He contacts Henry VI, the Holy Roman Emperor, and offers to sell his royal prisoner. Henry, who has his own grievances against Richard and sees an opportunity for profit, agrees. In February 1193, Richard is transferred to Henry's custody. The ransom demand is staggering: 150,000 silver marks, perhaps 3 times England's annual royal income. In England, Richard's mother Eleanor of Aquitaine begins the enormous task of raising the sum. Churches are stripped of gold and silver. Clergy and laymen are taxed at 25% of their property value. Additional levies are imposed on knights and landholders. Meanwhile, Henry plays Richard against his enemies. Philip II of France, who had returned from the crusade early and begun seizing Richard's French territories, offers 80,000 marks to keep Richard imprisoned. Richard's brother John, who stands to inherit if Richard dies, also makes overtures. Henry entertains these offers, driving up the price. Richard remains captive for more than a year, from December 1192 until February 1194. The ransom is eventually paid, a crushing financial burden that requires taxing England at unprecedented rates. On February 4th, 1194, Richard is finally released from captivity in Mainz, Germany. The money enriches Henry VI, who uses the windfall to fund his campaign to conquer Sicily. Leopold receives his share before dying of gangrene after a fall from his horse, an event contemporaries interpreted as divine punishment for imprisoning a crusader. Richard returns to England briefly before spending the rest of his life warring in France against Philip, trying to reclaim territories lost during his absence. The Third Crusade ended without achieving its stated goal. Jerusalem remained in Muslim hands, where it would stay until the 20th century. The true cross was never recovered. It vanished from history, either destroyed or lost. The Kingdom of Jerusalem survived only as a coastal strip, dependent on sea power and the balance between Muslim factions for its continued existence. Yet the crusade was not entirely unsuccessful. The Crusader states, which seemed on the verge of extinction after Hattin, were stabilized. Acre would remain in Christian hands for another century. Cyprus, conquered by Richard on his way to the Holy Land, became a lasting Crusader kingdom. The military confrontation established a rough equilibrium that would persist for decades. Richard returned to Europe with his reputation as a warrior enhanced despite the strategic failures. The epithet Lionheart, Coeur de Lion would attach to his name in later legend, though the historical Richard was a more complex figure than the romantic image suggests. He was capable of brilliant tactical improvisation, as at Jaffa, and of cold brutality, as at Acre. Saladin emerged from the crusade with his conquests largely intact, though his failure to dislodge the Crusaders from the coast meant the conflict would continue. He died less than a year after Richard's departure, in March 1193, having devoted his life to unifying Muslim territories and recovering Jerusalem. His dynasty, the Ayyubids, would rule Egypt and Syria for decades, though it would fragment after his death. The thousands who participated in the crusade nobles, knights, soldiers, pilgrims returned home, changed by years of hardship in a foreign land. Many never returned at all, dying of disease in siege camps or battles in the desert. Their bodies were buried far from home, their names recorded in chronicles that attempted to make sense of an enterprise that achieved less than promised but cost more than anticipated. And in the end, the Holy Land remained what it had always been, contested ground where religions and empires collided, where the faithful came seeking redemption and found instead the timeless realities of war, disease, and the limitations of human will against strategic impossibility. To comprehend how medieval physicians understood leprosy, you must first enter their conceptual world, a framework of medical thought that governed healing practice for over a millennium. At its foundation lay the theory of the four humors, inherited from ancient Greek medicine through the writings of Hippocrates and refined by Galen in the 2nd century A.D. The theory proposed that the human body contained four fundamental fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Each humor possessed distinct qualities drawn from the four elements. Blood was hot and moist, like air. Phlegm was cold and moist, like water. Yellow bile was hot and dry, like fire. Black bile was cold and dry, like earth. Health existed when these four humors remained in balance. Disease arose from imbalance, and excess or deficiency of one or more humors disrupting the body's natural equilibrium. The task of the physician was to diagnose which humor had fallen out of balance and prescribe treatments to restore harmony. The humors shaped not only physical health, but also temperament and personality. A person with excess blood was sanguine, cheerful, courageous, ruddy complexioned. Excess phlegm produced a phlegmatic temperament, apathetic, listless, pale. Too much yellow bile made one choleric, angry, irritable, with yellowish skin. Excess black bile caused melancholy, sad, creative, dark in complexion. This was the lens through which medieval physicians viewed all illness, including leprosy. The disease was not understood as an infectious agent invading the body. The concept of contagion existed only in rudimentary form, but rather as a profound humoral imbalance that manifested in the flesh. Medieval medical texts categorized leprosy into 4 distinct types, each corresponding to an excess of one of the 4 humors. This classification appears in authoritative works like Gilbert the Englishman's Compendium Medicinae, written around 1230, and Jordan of Tours' The Symptoms of Leprosy, composed around 1330. Leprosy attributed to excess blood was called leonine leprosy, named for the lion-like swelling and distortion it caused to facial features. The skin became reddened and thick. The face coarsened, features broadening and losing definition. The eyebrows thickened. The nose swelled. Contemporary illustrations show faces transformed by this leonine appearance, though medieval artists often exaggerated the effect. Leprosy from excess yellow bile produced a form characterized by yellowish discoloration, ulcerations that spread across the skin, and a bitter disposition that matched the choleric temperament. This type was considered particularly aggressive, consuming flesh rapidly. Phlegmatic leprosy resulted from too much phlegm. This form manifested as whitish lesions, numbness spreading through the extremities, and a general coldness of temperament and body. The flesh became soft and pale, losing sensation. The most severe form, however, was attributed to excess black bile. This melancholic leprosy darkened the skin, caused the most profound disfigurement, and was considered the hardest to treat. Black bile was cold and dry, and these qualities manifested in flesh that seemed to wither and die while the person yet lived. The classification was elegant in theory, providing physicians with a framework for understanding the bewildering variety of symptoms that leprosy presented. In practice, however, the disease rarely conformed to these neat categories. Patients presented with combinations of symptoms that crossed humoral boundaries, forcing physicians to make complex diagnoses, balancing multiple imbalances simultaneously. Diagnosing leprosy in the medieval period was a formal, methodical process that combined physical examination with humoral analysis. The procedure reveals that medieval physicians, whatever the limitations of their theoretical framework, approached diagnosis empirically and systematically. When a person presented with suspicious symptoms, skin lesions, numbness, changes in complexion, the physician would conduct a thorough examination. The patient's urine was inspected for color, clarity, and sediment, as urine was believed to reveal the body's internal humoral state. Blood samples were taken and examined. The physician felt the patient's pulse, assessing its strength and rhythm. The skin itself received careful scrutiny. The physician looked for specific signs: discolored patches, nodules beneath the surface, areas of thickening, loss of hair, changes in skin texture. Sensation was tested by pricking various parts of the body with needles. Loss of sensation was a particularly significant diagnostic criterion, indicating nerve damage. Guy de Chauliac's Le Grande Chirurgie, written in 1363, provided detailed diagnostic criteria that became standard reference for identifying leprosy. His symptomology included not just skin changes, but also specific patterns of nerve damage, facial alterations, and progression of numbness from extremities toward the body's core. If the diagnosis was uncertain, the physician might convene a panel of other medical practitioners, along with confirmed lepers who could recognize the disease in its early stages. This practice, documented in various medieval sources, suggests that diagnosis was taken seriously, with awareness that misdiagnosis carried profound consequences for the accused person. Once leprosy was confirmed, the patient was declared leprous, a medical verdict that immediately became a legal and social status. The diagnosis triggered the separatio leprosorum, the ritual separation from society described earlier. From that point forward, a person's identity was fundamentally defined by their disease. Medieval medicine recognized that humoral balance could be disrupted by factors external to the body. These were called the six non-naturals: air, diet, exercise, sleep, excretion, and the passions of the soul, what we would now call emotions. Poor air quality, whether from miasmas rising from swamps, the stench of cities, or corrupt winds, could introduce bad humors into the body through respiration. This belief explains why leprosaria were often built in rural locations with access to clean air and water. Diet was considered the most important factor. Food was understood to be transformed into humors during digestion, so consuming the wrong foods would generate excess of particular humors. A diet heavy in foods considered cold and dry would produce excess black bile, potentially triggering melancholic leprosy. Exercise, sleep patterns, and proper elimination of wastes all played roles in maintaining balance. Excessive or insufficient exercise could disrupt humoral circulation. Poor sleep prevented the body from naturally rebalancing its humors during rest. Constipation or other problems with excretion meant toxic humors remained in the body rather than being expelled. The passions of the soul, strong emotions, were believed capable of destabilizing humors. Excessive anger generated yellow bile. Prolonged sadness increased black bile. Fear and anxiety disturbed the natural flow of humors through the body. This belief created a feedback loop in leprosy diagnosis. The disease was attributed partly to emotional imbalance, and the diagnosis itself triggered profound emotional distress that medieval theory suggested would worsen the condition. Medieval historian Anne-Marie Leander-Tawati has argued persuasively for understanding medieval leprosy through a double etiology. Both external factors, the non-naturals, and internal constitution, natural humoral balance, contributed to disease. A person might be predisposed to melancholic temperament by nature, but an immoral act, dietary change, or emotional trauma could trigger the humoral crisis that manifested as leprosy. This framework meant that leprosy was understood as simultaneously physical and moral. The body's corruption reflected, in some sense, a spiritual or behavioral corruption. This association would have profound consequences for how lepers were perceived and treated in medieval society. If leprosy resulted from humoral imbalance, then treatment logically consisted of correcting that imbalance. For melancholic leprosy, attributed to excess black bile, cold and dry, the prescribed treatment emphasized foods and therapies that were warm and moist. The diet in leprosaria reflected this therapeutic logic. Fish, particularly fatty varieties, were considered moist and therefore beneficial. Eggs, poultry, and pork, all classified as warm and moist, were prescribed regularly. Fresh milk from cows, kept specifically for this purpose, provided both nutrition and humoral balance. The leprosarium's fishing rights, dairy herds, and poultry flocks were not luxuries but medical necessities. Herbal remedies formed another pillar of treatment. Recent archaeological analysis of dental calculus mineralized plaque on teeth from medieval lepers has revealed traces of specific medicinal plants. Ginger appears repeatedly, consistent with historical texts recommending it for leprosy. Constantine the African, an 11th century physician whose translations of Arabic medical texts profoundly influenced European medicine, prescribed oral treatments combining ginger with other herbs to alleviate stomach pain triggered by leprosy. The discovery of ginger residue in dental tartar from the medieval leper colony at St. Leonard's in Peterborough, England, provides archaeological confirmation that these prescribed treatments were actually administered. Other substances found in lepers' dental calculus include mercury. Mixed with other minerals, mercury was used as an ointment to cover skin imperfections and provide pain relief. Given leprosy's severe impact on skin, mercury compounds would have been applied to lesions and nodules. The toxic effects of mercury were not understood, though they certainly contributed to patients' suffering. More exotic treatments appear in medical texts, though whether they were commonly practiced is uncertain. Various sources recommended drinking or bathing in bloodberg blood from sacrificed animals, lamb's blood, even dog blood. The Swiss physician Paracelsus, in the 16th century, still recommended lamb's blood for leprosy. Snake venom, bee stings, and other dramatic interventions were proposed as cures. Bloodletting, the deliberate removal of blood to reduce excess of the sanguine humor, was a standard medical practice throughout the medieval period. For leprosy not attributed to excess blood, bleeding might still be prescribed to reduce overall humoral volume or to rebalance competing humors. The practice, though it appears barbaric to modern eyes, was based on logical application of humoral theory. Bathing featured prominently in treatment regimens. Hot baths encouraged sweating, which was believed to expel corrupt humors through the skin. Mineral springs were particularly valued for their therapeutic properties. The ritual dimension of bathing, its association with baptism and spiritual cleansing, merged with the medical rationale. Water was thought to wash away sin, and since humoral imbalance had moral dimensions, bathing addressed both physical and spiritual corruption simultaneously. The treatments were largely ineffective against the actual disease. None of them targeted the bacterial infection we now know as Mycobacterium leprae, but they provided structure, hope, and in some cases, genuine palliative care. The nutritious diet probably did improve overall health, even if it couldn't cure leprosy. Bathing offered comfort and dignity. Herbal remedies sometimes alleviated symptoms even without addressing root causes. Alongside medical understanding ran a parallel religious interpretation of leprosy. The disease occupied a unique position in Christian theology, understood as both punishment and opportunity. The Old Testament provided the foundation for this view. Leviticus contained detailed instructions for identifying leprosy and separating afflicted individuals from the community. The disease was explicitly linked to ritual impurity, requiring cleansing rituals and priestly intervention. When these passages were translated into Latin, the Hebrew word sarat, which likely referred to various skin conditions, became lepra, creating a direct connection between biblical impurity and medieval diagnosis. Medieval Christian theology, particularly as influenced by St. Jerome's biblical commentaries, interpreted leprosy as God's punishment for sin. The disease manifested in the flesh as visible sign of internal spiritual corruption. This interpretation aligned conveniently with humoral theory's suggestion that moral failings, passions of the soul, could disrupt bodily balance. But medieval Christianity also developed a more complex, sometimes contradictory understanding. Leprosy could be divine punishment, yes, but it could also be a test of faith, an opportunity for redemption, a gift that offered the sufferer a chance to purify their soul through suffering. This view is articulated in various religious texts about leprosaria. The institutions were not merely hospitals, but places of spiritual transformation, where lepers, separated from worldly concerns, could focus entirely on salvation. Robert of Flamborough, writing around 1210, classified lepers in leprosaria, alongside monks as members of religious orders. The implication was clear. Leprosy, properly accepted and endured, could become a form of monastic vocation. Some religious writers went further, suggesting that lepers occupied a special spiritual status. Their suffering gave them privileged access to divine mercy. Their prayers were particularly efficacious. Wealthy benefactors donated to leprosaria, explicitly requesting that residents pray for their souls. Believing lepers' intercession was especially powerful. This created a paradox at the heart of medieval attitudes toward leprosy. Lepers were simultaneously polluted and holy, cast out and spiritually elevated, punished sinners and blessed penitents. They were legally dead, but engaged in vital spiritual labor. They were excluded from society, but performed essential religious functions on behalf of that society. The separatio leprosorum, that ritual declaring lepers dead to the world and reborn to God, captured this dual status perfectly. It was exclusion framed as spiritual opportunity, social death presented as path to eternal life. In 1873, Norwegian physician Gerhard Armauer Hansen identified the bacterium that causes leprosy, later named Mycobacterium leprae in his honor. It was the first bacterium identified as causing human disease, a landmark achievement in medical microbiology. Hansen worked at St. Jurgen's Hospital in Bergen, an institution founded in the early 15th century specifically for lepers. Norway was experiencing a leprosy outbreak in the 19th century, providing Hansen with access to numerous patients. Under his microscope, he observed small rod-shaped organisms in tissue samples from leprous lesions. The organisms were acid-fast, meaning they retained certain stains even when washed with acid, a property shared with tuberculosis bacteria. But they differed from tuberculosis in specific ways. They were extremely numerous in lesions, formed characteristic intracellular clusters called globi, and displayed varied shapes including branching and swelling. These differences confirmed that leprosy was caused by a distinct organism, related to but separate from Mycobacterium tuberculosis. Hansen's discovery revolutionized understanding of leprosy, transforming it from a mysterious humoral imbalance into a bacterial infection. Yet the discovery also revealed how complex the medieval diagnostic situation had been. Modern paleopathological studies, the examination of archaeological skeletal remains, show that medieval leprosy encompassed multiple conditions. True Hansen's disease caused by Mycobacterium leprae certainly existed and has been confirmed through ancient DNA analysis and skeletal pathology in remains from medieval Europe. Archaeological evidence of leprosy has been found across the continent: Denmark, England, France, Germany, Italy, Ireland, the Czech Republic, Hungary. The disease left characteristic marks on bones, particularly rhinomaxillary syndrome, RMS, specific patterns of bone erosion in the face and hands caused by the bacterium's attack on nerve endings and subsequent tissue death. Studies have found that approximately 4 out of 5 archaeological skeletons diagnosed with leprosy exhibit some degree of RMS, confirming they suffered from the most severe form of Hansen's disease. These individuals came from both leprosaria and regular cemeteries, indicating the disease affected people across different social contexts. However, medieval physicians diagnosed leprosy based on symptoms visible in living patients: skin lesions, discoloration, sensory loss. Many other conditions produce similar symptoms: psoriasis, eczema, vitiligo, various fungal infections, even nutritional deficiencies. Without microscopes or bacterial cultures, medieval diagnosticians were identifying a syndrome, a constellation of symptoms, rather than a specific disease. This means that many people diagnosed with medieval leprosy and subjected to the separatio leprosorum may not have had Hansen's disease at all. They suffered genuine medical conditions that manifested similarly, but they were not infectious with Mycobacterium leprae. Yet they endured the same social death, the same exile to leprosaria, the same lifelong stigma. Medieval medicine did observe correctly that leprosy was not highly contagious. Unlike plague or smallpox, which spread rapidly through populations, leprosy required prolonged close contact, and even then infected only a fraction of exposed individuals. This observation appears in medieval sources that emphasize leprosy as divine intervention rather than contagion. Modern medicine confirms this. Mycobacterium leprae is only mildly contagious, transmitted through respiratory droplets during prolonged contact, and approximately 95% of humans have natural immunity. The medieval observation that leprosy ran in families was accurate, not because it was hereditary, but because household members experienced the prolonged contact necessary for transmission, and the 5% without natural immunity were more likely to be infected by infected family members. The medieval emphasis on diet, while based on incorrect humoral theory, may have had some beneficial effects. Malnutrition weakens immune response, making infection more likely and symptoms more severe. The nutritious diet provided in leprosaria rich in protein, fats, and vitamins probably did improve patients' overall health and quality of life, even if it couldn't cure the bacterial infection. The herbal treatments revealed by archaeological analysis show that medieval practitioners were experimenting with remedies. Ginger possesses anti-inflammatory properties and aids digestion. While it couldn't cure Hansen's disease, it may have provided symptomatic relief. Interestingly, the use of medicinal herbs may have contributed to antibiotic resistance in the oral bacteria of treated individuals, as analysis of ancient DNA from dental calculus suggests. Medieval medicine, in trying to cure leprosy, may have inadvertently influenced bacterial evolution. By the 16th century, leprosy had largely disappeared from Western Europe. The reasons for this decline remain debated. Leprosaria closed as patient numbers dwindled. The elaborate diagnostic procedures described in medical texts gradually became historical curiosities rather than practical necessities. Various theories have been proposed. Improved nutrition strengthening population immunity, the Black Death killing many lepers and disrupting transmission chains, cross-immunity from tuberculosis, providing protection against leprosy, changing climate affecting bacterial survival. The reality was likely a combination of factors. What is clear is that leprosy transitioned from a major medical concern in medieval Europe to a disease associated primarily with tropical regions and colonial contexts. The medieval diagnostic criteria, religious interpretations, and humoral treatments faded from medical practice. By the time Hansen identified the bacterium, European physicians needed to travel to Norway or to colonial possessions to study the disease. Yet the stigma persisted, outliving the medical reality. Even after the bacterial cause was identified, even after effective antibiotic treatment became available in the 20th century, the association between leprosy and moral corruption, social pollution, and divine punishment continued to shape how sufferers were perceived and treated. The medieval legacy proved more durable than medieval medicine itself. In the modern world, the disease has been renamed Hansen's disease, specifically to escape the stigma attached to the word leprosy. It is curable with multi-drug antibiotic therapy. Yet people diagnosed with it still face discrimination rooted in medieval religious and medical concepts that have been scientifically obsolete for over a century. The medieval understanding of leprosy, that intricate weaving together of humoral theory, religious interpretation, empirical observation, and moral judgment, was wrong in its specifics, but reflected genuine attempts to make sense of devastating illness with the conceptual tools available. Medieval physicians observed, documented, theorized, and treated as best they could within their paradigm. Their framework was ultimately inadequate, but their careful diagnostic procedures and systematic approach to treatment reveal sophisticated medical thinking constrained by limited understanding of biological mechanisms. And perhaps most importantly, the medieval experience of leprosy, the social death, the institutional care, the complex mixture of exclusion and spiritual meaning shaped how human societies think about disease, disability, and difference in ways that persist, sometimes invisibly, into our own time. Around the year 1050, merchants from the Italian city-state of Amalfi founded a hospital in Jerusalem. The city at that time existed as a contested prize on the frontier between the Fatimid Empire, centered in Egypt, and the expanding Seljuk Turkish Empire. Control of Jerusalem changed hands multiple times during these decades, yet both Muslim powers permitted Christian pilgrims to visit and even allowed the establishment of charitable institutions to serve them. The hospital was dedicated to John the Baptist and staffed by Benedictine monks who provided care for sick, poor, and injured Christian pilgrims making the arduous journey to the Holy Land. The facility operated under the auspices of the Benedictine monastery of Santa Maria Latina in Jerusalem. It was, in its earliest years, both a hospice, a place for travelers to lodge, and an infirmary providing actual medical treatment. 12th century pilgrims who visited Jerusalem used different terms to describe the institution. William of Tyre called it a xenodochium, a boarding house for travelers. Others, including the chroniclers Amatus of Monte Cassino and Albert of Aachen, referred to it as a hospital, emphasizing its medical function. Both interpretations were likely correct. Maintaining lodging for pilgrims inevitably required providing medical services, as travelers arrived exhausted, malnourished, and often ill after months of difficult journey. The hospital continued its work even as war raged around Jerusalem. When the First Crusade arrived in 1099 and besieged the city, the institution somehow survived the violence. After the Crusaders captured Jerusalem and established the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the hospital's leader was a monk named Gerard, sometimes called Gerard de Martigues or Blessed Gerard. Under Gerard's leadership, the hospital expanded dramatically. He acquired territory and revenues throughout the newly established Crusader kingdom. He built additional medical centers, hostels, and rest stations along the pilgrimage routes through Italy and across the Holy Land. The scale and ambition of his work caught the attention of the church hierarchy in Rome. On February 15, 1113, Pope Paschal II issued the papal bull Pi Postulatio Voluntatis, formally recognizing the Hospital of St. John as an independent religious order. The decree subordinated the hospital directly to papal authority, exempting it from local ecclesiastical control and from paying tithes on its lands. Most significantly, the Pope granted the brothers of the order the right to elect their own master, establishing self-governance. The papal recognition transformed the hospital from a local charitable institution into an international organization with the full backing of the Catholic Church. It also brought resources. The bull placed several hospitals and hospices in southern Italy under the governance of the Hospital of St. John, creating the beginning of a network that would eventually span Europe. The order received a new formal name, the Hospitallers of St. John of Jerusalem. They adopted distinctive dress, a black mantle with a white 8-pointed cross. Each point of the cross represented one of the 8 Beatitudes from the Sermon on the Mount, symbolizing the spiritual foundation of their work. By the middle of the 12th century, the hospital in Jerusalem had become the most advanced medical facility in the Christian world. The main building measured approximately 75 meters by 40 meters roughly, 250 feet by 130 feet, and could accommodate over 1,000 patients simultaneously. Some contemporary accounts suggest capacity reached as high as 2,000 patients during peak pilgrimage seasons. Recent archaeological excavations in Jerusalem's Old City have revealed the physical remains of this massive complex. The Israel Antiquities Authority, working from contemporaneous documents and physical evidence, has mapped the hospital's layout and organization. The structure was sophisticated, with different wings and departments organized according to patients' illnesses and conditions. The hospital had separate sections for men and women, maintaining the gender segregation expected in medieval Christian institutions. There were specialized wards for different categories of illness: fevers, wounds, eye diseases, women's conditions related to childbirth. The building even functioned as an orphanage, taking in abandoned newborns, a service that addressed a genuine social need in a city filled with pilgrims who sometimes died far from home, leaving children behind. Contemporary pilgrims who visited Jerusalem left written accounts marveling at the hospital's scale and quality. John of Wurzburg, a German pilgrim writing around 1165, described witnessing an enormous multitude of sick people, both men and women, being cared for in various rooms. He noted the cleanliness of the facility, the organization of care, and the dedication of the brothers who staffed it. The quality of medical care provided was remarkable by 11th and 12th century standards. The hospitalers employed physicians trained in both Western European and Arabic medical traditions. The Muslim Arab population of Jerusalem had been instrumental in helping the Crusaders establish the hospital, teaching them medical techniques developed in the sophisticated medical culture of medieval Islam. This cultural exchange is one of the more intriguing aspects of the hospitaler medical work. Despite the religious warfare occurring between Christians and Muslims throughout the region, medical knowledge crossed these boundaries. The hospitalers learned from Arab physicians, adopted some of their treatments and organizational practices, and in turn provided medical care to patients of different religions. Muslims and Jews, as well as Christians, received treatment in the Jerusalem hospital. The hospital maintained detailed administrative regulations governing everything from patient care protocols to financial management. These regulations, some of which survive in medieval manuscripts, reveal sophisticated organizational thinking. Specific brothers were assigned to different tasks: receiving incoming patients, diagnosing illnesses, administering treatments, managing supplies, maintaining cleanliness, preparing food according to dietary requirements. Patients received individual beds, a luxury rare in medieval healthcare, where multiple patients often shared beds. The beds had clean linens changed regularly. Meals were provided multiple times daily, with diet adjusted based on medical condition. The emphasis on nutrition reflected humoral medical theory's understanding that proper food was essential to restoring bodily balance. The hospital had its own pharmacy, where herbal remedies were prepared according to physicians' prescriptions. There were storage facilities for medical supplies, kitchens for preparing patient meals, wells providing clean water, and even baths for therapeutic washing. The infrastructure required to support 1,000 or more patients simultaneously was extraordinarily complex. Financial support came from multiple sources. Wealthy pilgrims made donations, often substantial, motivated by genuine charity and by the belief that supporting the hospital would earn spiritual merit. European nobles donated lands and revenues to the order. Kings granted the hospitalers properties, tax exemptions, and trading privileges. The order also handled pilgrims' wealth directly. People traveling to the Holy Land often entrusted their property and valuables to the hospitalers for safekeeping, especially if they were uncertain of surviving the journey. Some never returned, and their assets remained with the order. This practice, combined with donations and property grants, made the hospitalers extraordinarily wealthy by the mid-12th century. Gerard died around 1120, and Raymond Dupuy became the order's second master. Under his leadership, the hospitalers underwent a fundamental transformation. While maintaining their medical mission, they also became a military order, fielding knights who fought in defense of the Crusader states. The reasons for this militarization were practical. The Kingdom of Jerusalem existed in a state of near constant warfare. Muslim forces threatened the kingdom's borders. Pilgrims traveling to and from Jerusalem required armed protection. The hospitalers, with their network of facilities along pilgrimage routes, found themselves repeatedly called upon to provide military escort and defense. The Knights Templar, founded around 1119 to 1120, specifically as a military religious order to protect pilgrims, provided a model. Documents from 1126 record that Hospitaller brothers were already bearing military titles and participating in Christian military campaigns. By the 1130s, the militarization was formalized. The order now consisted of 3 classes of members' knights who fought, sergeants who provided military support, and chaplains who maintained religious services. This created an organization unique in medieval Europe. Warrior monks who took religious vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, but also trained for combat and participated in military campaigns. They lived communally, attended religious services multiple times daily, and between battles worked in hospitals caring for sick pilgrims. The contradiction at the heart of this identity was apparent even to contemporaries. How could the same man who nursed the dying also kill on the battlefield? The Hospitallers resolved this tension through religious ideology. Both acts were forms of Christian service. Caring for pilgrims served God by alleviating suffering. Fighting Muslims served God by defending Christian access to holy sites and protecting the vulnerable. The military expansion brought additional wealth. Kings and nobles granted the Hospitallers castles, fortifications, and land specifically to maintain military readiness. The order built and garrisoned massive fortresses throughout the Crusader states. Crack des Chevaliers in Syria, one of the most formidable castles ever constructed, was held by the Hospitallers and could garrison thousands of soldiers. The order's military reputation grew rapidly. Hospitaller knights participated in every major military campaign in the Holy Land throughout the 12th and 13th centuries. They fought at the battles of Hattin, Acre, Arsuf, and Jaffa during the Third Crusade. They defended coastal cities and inland fortresses. They conducted independent raids and expeditions. Yet throughout this military expansion, the medical mission continued. The hospital in Jerusalem kept operating, treating patients even as Hospitaller knights fought in distant battles. The contradiction embodied by the order violence in service of charity, warfare conducted by healers, became its defining characteristic. The Hospitallers' success in the Holy Land generated expansion across Europe. The order established preceptories' regional headquarters that managed properties and recruited members in virtually every Christian kingdom. England, France, Germany, Spain, Italy, and numerous smaller territories all contained Hospitaller establishments. These European properties served multiple functions. They were recruitment centers where men took vows and joined the order. They were training facilities where knights learned combat skills before traveling to the Holy Land. And critically, they were revenue generators, agricultural estates that produced crops and livestock, whose proceeds funded operations in Jerusalem and elsewhere. The preceptories operated as sophisticated economic enterprises. The Hospitallers cultivated lands granted to them by donors, raised livestock, produced wine and grain, and traded surplus goods in local and regional markets. They received rents from tenants farming their properties. They operated mills, fisheries, and other revenue-producing assets. This network created a financial system that moved resources from Europe to the Holy Land. Revenues generated on English or French estates funded the hospital in Jerusalem, supplied Hospitaller castles in Syria, and equipped knights fighting in the Levant. The scale of this operation was unprecedented. No institution, except perhaps the Catholic Church itself, operated across such distances with such financial sophistication. Some historians have suggested the Hospitallers may have developed proto-banking services, perhaps facilitating financial transfers between Europe and the Holy Land for pilgrims and merchants. The evidence is not conclusive, but the order certainly possessed the infrastructure and trust necessary for such operations. Pilgrims depositing wealth with Hospitallers in Europe and receiving it in Jerusalem would have required cross-continental financial coordination that anticipates later banking practices. The Knights Templar, the Hospitallers' contemporary rivals, definitely engaged in sophisticated financial operations, including early forms of credit transfers. Given the similarity of the two order structures and resources, it seems plausible the Hospitallers operated comparably, though their emphasis on medical care may have left less capacity for financial innovation. By the late 12th century, the Hospitallers had become one of the wealthiest and most powerful institutions in Christendom. Their revenues from European properties, combined with donations from wealthy patrons, gave them resources comparable to many kingdoms. This wealth funded not only their medical and military operations, but also architectural projects, religious foundations, and political influence. When Saladin recaptured Jerusalem in 1187, the Hospitallers lost their flagship hospital. The brothers evacuated ahead of the Muslim conquest, taking what they could carry and abandoning the rest. The order shifted its headquarters first to Margat, then to Acre, after that coastal city was secured by Richard the Lionheart's forces in 1191. At Acre, the Hospitallers rebuilt. They constructed a new hospital, smaller than the Jerusalem facility, but still substantial, again capable of serving up to 2,000 patients. The medical work continued, even as the military situation remained precarious. Hospitaller knights fought in the defense of the remaining Crusader territories, while their brothers maintained hospital services. The order held Acre for a century. But in 1291, the city fell to Mamluk forces, marking the effective end of the Crusader presence in the Holy Land. Once again, Hospitallers evacuated, this time to Cyprus. They had lost their hospitals, their castles, and their raison d'etre caring for pilgrims in the Holy Land, when Christian access to that land had been severed. Yet the order survived. In 1309, the Hospitallers conquered the island of Rhodes, establishing an independent state ruled by a religious military order. Rhodes became their new headquarters for over 2 centuries. They built fortifications, maintained a navy, and continued their dual mission of medical care and military operations, now directed primarily against Ottoman expansion. The Great Siege of Rhodes in 1522 finally dislodged them. Ottoman Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, determined to eliminate this Christian stronghold in the eastern Mediterranean, besieged Rhodes with overwhelming force. The Hospitallers, numbering perhaps 500 knights plus supporting forces, held out for months before negotiating an honorable surrender. The order relocated to Malta in 1530, granted the island by Holy Roman Emperor Charles. The Fifth Malta became their new sovereign territory, a tiny state ruled by a military religious order. The Hospitallers transformed Malta into a fortress, building elaborate defenses and maintaining a powerful navy. In 1565, the Ottomans tried again to destroy the order. The Great Siege of Malta saw Ottoman forces numbering perhaps 40,000 attack an island defended by approximately 500 Hospitaller knights and 6,000 additional soldiers. The siege lasted months, with horrific casualties on both sides, but the Hospitallers held. The Ottoman failure marked a turning point in Mediterranean history, checking Ottoman naval expansion westward. The Knights Hospitaller remained in Malta for nearly 3 more centuries, until Napoleon expelled them in 1798. The order relocated to Rome, where its headquarters remain today. It continues to exist as a sovereign entity recognized by the Catholic Church and numerous states, though it controls no territory. Modern incarnations of the order focus on medical and humanitarian work. The Sovereign Military Order of Malta operates hospitals, provides disaster relief, and distributes medical aid worldwide. Between 2012 and 2014 alone, the order distributed approximately $60 million in medical assistance. Other branches include St. John's Ambulance, a volunteer emergency medical service operating in numerous countries. The Knights Hospitaller represent one of medieval Christianity's most intriguing contradictions. They were monks who killed, warriors who healed, a military force dedicated to mercy. The 8-pointed cross they wore symbolized the Beatitudes. Blessed are the merciful. Blessed are the peacemakers. Yet they participated in some of the bloodiest conflicts of the medieval period. This contradiction was not lost on contemporaries. How could the same institution run hospitals treating Muslims and wage war against Islam? How could brothers who took vows of poverty accumulate vast wealth? How could men sworn to Christian humility exercise temporal power as rulers of territories? The Hospitallers resolved these tensions through religious ideology that understood both medicine and warfare as forms of Christian service. The sick deserved care because Christ commanded mercy. The enemy deserved death because defense of Christendom required violence. Both impulses sprang from the same religious foundation, making them compatible rather than contradictory in the medieval worldview. Modern observers, looking back across centuries, may struggle with this logic. The cognitive dissonance between healing and killing seems irreconcilable. Yet for the Hospitallers, and for the medieval society that supported them with donations, property, and recruits, no fundamental contradiction existed. Both activities served the same ultimate purpose: defending and supporting Christian pilgrimage to holy sites, caring for the vulnerable, and advancing Christendom's interests in a hostile world. The hospital in Jerusalem, that enormous facility treating up to 2,000 patients with sophisticated organizational systems and cross-cultural medical knowledge, stands as testament to what medieval society could achieve when properly motivated and resourced. The military campaigns, the castles, the naval battles against Ottoman expansion demonstrate medieval Christian commitment to defending their conception of sacred space. The Hospitallers embodied both medieval Christianity's highest ideals: charity, service, self-sacrifice, and its darkest practices: religious warfare, cultural destruction, colonial ambition. They were simultaneously one of history's great humanitarian organizations and a military order that participated in centuries of religious conflict. That this contradiction seems irreconcilable to modern sensibilities reveals how much has changed in the intervening centuries. The medieval world operated under different assumptions about violence, charity, religious duty, and the appropriate mixing of spiritual and temporal power. The Knights Hospitaller, born from those assumptions and shaped by them, survived into the modern world, but transformed fundamentally, retaining their medical mission while abandoning their military one. Today, when ambulances bearing the 8-pointed cross respond to emergencies, when hospitals operated by successor organizations treat patients regardless of religion, the connection to armored knights besieging Acre or defending Rhodes seems tenuous. Yet the continuity exists, an unbroken thread reaching back to that hospital in 11th century Jerusalem, where Benedictine monks cared for exhausted pilgrims, beginning an organization that would span centuries and continents, embodying all the complexities and contradictions of medieval Christendom. And so we arrive at the end of our journey through medieval worlds, both familiar and strange. We began in the leprosarium, among the legally dead who continued living, experiencing social death while hearts still beat. We witnessed the rituals of separation, the bells that marked the excluded, the paradoxical community found in shared exile. We traveled to the deserts of the Holy Land, where Richard and Saladin clashed in pursuit of Jerusalem. We stood at Acre during the long siege, watched the massacre that followed, marched along the coast to Jaffa, and turned back twice from Jerusalem itself, unable to solve the strategic impossibility of holding a city so far from the sea. We entered the medieval physician's understanding of disease, where humors governed health and illness manifested from imbalance. We learned how leprosy was diagnosed, how it was treated, and how modern science revealed both the kernel of truth in medieval observation and the profound limitations of humoral theory. And we discovered the Knights Hospitaller, those warrior monks who embodied medieval Christianity's capacity for both extraordinary charity and sanctified violence, who built hospitals treating thousands while simultaneously waging war, who healed with one hand and wielded swords with the other. These stories, separated by geography and purpose, share common threads. All involve people attempting to make sense of suffering, to impose order on chaos, to find meaning in hardship. The lepers created community in isolation. The Crusaders sought redemption through warfare. The physicians built elaborate theories to explain disease. The Hospitallers fused healing and fighting into coherent religious vocation. From the distance of centuries, we can see what they could not, that leprosy was bacterial infection rather than humoral imbalance, that Jerusalem's strategic position made it ultimately indefensible by sea-dependent Crusader states, that the contradictions at the heart of militant monasticism would eventually become untenable. Yet we can also recognize what remains constant across those centuries: human resilience in the face of devastating diagnosis, strategic calculation in the pursuit of political goals, the drive to understand and treat illness, even with inadequate conceptual frameworks, the capacity to hold contradictory impulses, mercy and violence, exclusion and community, despair and hope simultaneously. You lie now in comfort and safety in a world transformed by antibiotics, modern medicine, international law, and changed understanding of religious obligation. The leprosaria are long closed, their residents freed by effective treatment and changed social attitudes. Jerusalem has changed hands many more times since Richard retreated. Humoral theory has been replaced by germ theory, cellular biology, genetics. The Knights Hospitaller operate ambulances rather than warships. Yet the human experiences underlying these medieval stories, isolation and community, ambition and failure, illness and care, violence and mercy, remain recognizable. We are separated from the medieval world by vast changes in technology, medicine, and social organization, but connected to it by the persistence of human nature across time. Let these stories accompany you now into sleep. Let them remind you of the comfort of your own circumstances, the progress that has been made, the suffering that has been alleviated. But let them also remind you of continuity, of the long human story of which you are a part, stretching back through centuries of struggle and adaptation, resilience and change. Rest now. The bells of the leprosarium are silent. The armies have departed from Acre. The physicians have closed their texts on humoral theory. The knights have hung up their swords. And you, comfortable in the present, can drift peacefully into sleep, knowing that the past, for all its hardship, has led to this moment of warmth and safety. Sleep well.